Well, thanks a lot for taking us down memory lane. John, all the best.
Thank you.
We'll see you at the 2018 Cop Match Classic up here and maybe down there on eye level to the action.
Yeah.
All right. What's up, everyone? We are here at the Somerset Cricket Club. Up on the top level, this is the porch where all of the special players and past members get to watch Cop Match. And we are on the road to Cop Match. So we're here with Mr. John Stovall. This is a location that you still watch the Cop Match Classic?
I certainly do, and I wouldn't miss it.
Yeah? You
That's
catch
right.
every single one, even Benison St. George's?
Unless it rains.
Unless it rains.
Like last year.
Okay.
Okay.
You were a former Cop Match player, captain, or just player? Both? Both?
Both.
Okay, and you played from about 1950 to 1961?
Yeah, 61, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you remember the game being played over at the Naval Field?
Of course. Before this, down below here where those stands are, underneath that was horse stables.
Right. So what was that like, man? Cop Match was played over on the Navy Field.
Fantastic.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah. And people used to dress up for Cop Match, man.
Like the best of the best.
I mean the best. God, fellas used to come in their kind of hats that they had, you know. They used to come up in their carriages and horses and all that kind of stuff, you know. Yeah, I remember. And I'm in my 80s now, see.
Wow. You've been to just about every single Cop Match since. What year do you think was your first time attending Cop Match? How old were you?
I remember going to St. George's to Cop Match on the train, okay?
Good evening, everyone. It's great to see you guys here this evening. I see everybody pouring in, and it's 8 o'clock on the dot, and we are starting. So welcome this evening. My name is Rashida, and I'm gonna be your hostess this evening. We are glad to have you join this evening's Lunch and Learn, which is based on a Sankofa journey of 2 stories of emancipation, which are Mary Prince and the Friendly Societies, and their struggles and stories about freedom and equality right here in Bermuda. We would like to thank the Department of Community and Cultural Affairs, the Bermuda Sign Painters, and Titan Express for that sponsorship of this presentation today. I'm just going to introduce to you now the panel that we have for this evening, and we have educator and author Ajala Amadele, who has written such books as they call them Rose, Pualo Karamafego, and The Making of a Bermudian Revolutionary. Look for Me in the Whirlwind, a story of Marcus Garvey. Dame Lewis, the People's Advocate, and his new book called A Tale of Two Women, Sally Bassett and Mary Prince, and the True Story of Slavery in Bermuda, which is going to be out shortly. We also have Gina Davis, and she's also an educator. She's also on the panel this evening. And all of them have provided much research towards this presentation this evening that we have in store for you. So we hope that you guys enjoy it. We would also like to thank the following contributors due to the research work that's also going into this presentation as well. We have Leonie Genius. She had written a research article paper for Oxford University based on My Name is Sue, and that is the mother of Mary Prince. We have research from Cyril Otterbridge Packwood's book, Chained on the Rock, Slavery in Bermuda. And also reference and research was also taken from the Bermuda National Trust books for Hamilton's Town and City and the Pembroke Parish. Also, research was also taken from Mary Prince's book, her enslaved narrative called The History of Mary Prince, a West Indian Slave. And all of these books can be purchased from either the Griot and the Brown and Company bookstores, which are located in Hamilton. So as we are entering into the Emancipation holiday, which many of you guys would refer to as Cup Match, we are honoring Mary Prince. We're going to share some of her story and her contribution to emancipation, of course, mainly because this will be the first year that we actually celebrate her in Bermuda. The second day of Cup Match from here on in is going to be known as Mary Prince Day. So we're also going to honor the friendly societies and share their stories of contribution to during emancipation and Cup Match as well. We will be also playing video discussions from lodge members from the friendly societies, lodge members Norbert Simmons and Mrs. Joy Wilson Tucker. So just before we get right into the presentation, just a few more seconds, guys. We just have a few housekeeping items that we'd just like to go over. There will be question and answer periods. We hope to make this discussion this evening very engaging with folks so that we could definitely share this history with you. And at any time, you could continue to start putting comments in the chat. You guys can see the chat there. If you have any questions, you could put them in the chat as well too, and I'll do my best to stay on top of that. And I apologize if there's any issues at any time during this presentation, and we just ask that you please have patience with us. So in acknowledgement of the ancestors of whose stories we will share and those who have all contributed to our Emancipation Cup Match holiday, we are going to offer a libation to honor them. And we're going to share a video with Ajala conducting it. As a disclaimer, please note this is not done as an insult to or against any religion or any types of other practices. In actuality, many times people perform libations without even realizing it, such as pouring a libation when a loved one transitions, or many times even in remembrance of their loved ones on the anniversary of their death. In African cultures and African traditional religions, the ritual of pouring libations is an essential ceremonial tradition and a way of giving homage to the ancestors. A prayer is offered calling the ancestors to attend, and a libation of water or liquor is offered to them. The choice of liquid depends on the nature of the libation and prayer and what your aim is in either invoking or awakening the ancestors. After doing these things, you close with Ashe, Ashe, which means let it be done. So now we're going to play the short video of a libation. Thank you.
Our ancestors voyaged through death to life on these shores. We are here because of them. Mojuba, I give praise to Olodumare, the queen whose mat spreads across the universe. I give praise to the sunset and the sunrise. I give praise to the Egun, the ancestors, both known and unknown. I give praise to the Orisha, the manifestations of Olodumare, the supreme being, who are made manifest in the natural order and the natural world, and who are found within each and every human being. King Kamashe, let no negativity befall those of you who are watching this broadcast. May there be no fighting in your families. May there be no death in your families in this time of COVID-19. May there be no sickness in your families. Grant us long life. Grant us overall health and peace. Ashe. Ashe, Asheo, Ashe, Yoruba word meaning, may it be so.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Jala. Appreciate that very much. And Ashe. Anyone on the panel want to discuss anything on the video that we just shared? Also, audience, if you guys have any questions or comments, you could feel free to put them in the chat.
Let's say it was pouring libation has been a part of African cultures across the continent for millennia. And it was generally accepted and recognized as a very tangible way of ensuring communion between those in the land of the living, like ourselves, and those who have ventured and returned to, in fact, the realm of the spirit. So a libation was like, I suppose one can think of the communication as being akin to making a cell phone call. We are contacting those who have gone before us into the realm of the spirit, and we are seeking to access their wisdom and their guidance in order to navigate the challenges that we face in the here and now. Our ancestors understood that death is not the end, and those of the dead are still part of and in communion with those here in the land of the living. We recognize that there wasn't a break, a fundamental break, a separation between those who are living and those who are in the spirit realm. We recognize that they were part and parcel of a whole interconnected one. And so it allowed us to maintain communication with those gone.
Apologies for that. It looks like we kind of lost a bit of a Jala there. So let me just. Okay, so we'll just continue on.
Was I not heard at all?
Yeah, I think it seemed like you got a little bit. So yeah. You want to go ahead one more time, Jala?
Yeah. I don't have a script, so it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Essentially, can I be heard clearly now? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard you
Okay.
now. Yeah, I feel like
Right. A libation is essentially an opening of the lines of communication between those of us in the land of the living and those of us who have gone onto the realm of the ancestors. It allowed us to access the wisdom and the significantly broader vision of those in the realm of the spirit, and to access their ability to see further and more deeply than we can here in the land of the living, so that we can access that ability to see further and to see more deeply into, for example, challenges that may beset us here in the here and now. Our ancestors across the continent understood that death does not mean the end, and that the community encompassed those who are living as well as those who are ancestors, and that libation acted as a bridge connecting those two realms. So for us, ancestral veneration in the form of pouring libation and calling the names of the dead is an act of recognition of the fundamental interconnectivity of these two realms, those of the living and those of the ancestors, and that there is no break, and that death does not mean the end. There is life, essentially, after life. And our ancestors recognized that and have recognized and embraced that concept for millennia.
excellent. Thank you for that, Jala. All right. And the next thing, so as we continue on, as earlier I had mentioned that this is going to be a Sankofa journey. So panel, Jala, do you want to discuss what Sankofa means?
Yeah. Sankofa is a tree word meaning essentially to go back and fetch it. Adinkra iconography is replete with examples of these profundities, these profound little axioms. that they encapsulated and artistically rendered in the form of these Adinkra symbols, one of which is the backward-facing bird with the egg in its mouth. Across the continent, in Kemet, Kemet is the original name of Egypt, means the black community of or the land of the black land. They, with their Medunecher, also encapsulated the wisdom of the ages in iconography. So we see across the vast expanse of the continent, two examples of two ethnic groups making use of iconography to communicate really deep and profound concepts that they wanted to ensure were enshrined in our consciousness, so they rendered them artistically so that we could tap into them many, many thousands of years into the future. So this is definitely one of these ideograms, if you will. So with Sankofa, what we are being challenged to do is to go back and look at our history and to mine our history and to tease out the wisdom to be found therein, and then to bring it forward here into the present day. Because there are many challenges that we are facing in the here and now that our ancestors have thought deeply about and have come up with solutions for. So it is our duty to go back and get that knowledge and wisdom and apply that knowledge and wisdom here in 2020, here in Bermuda, here in the here and now. So Sankofa is an admonition to us to not forget what was in the past and to go back, collect it, and bring it forward in order to birth a future that is pregnant with promise. Sankofa, go back and fetch it.
Exactly. Thank you for that, Jala. Yeah, Sankofa, that's one of my favorite ones as well, too, Sankofa, because again, you always could refer to even that we can't change the past, but we could always learn from the past to make a better future. But it's up to us to be able to do that. So we're moving on to the next part here. And Gina, can you tell us a little bit about the African Bermuda enslavement history? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And as we looking into our past, let's go back and think for over 400 years in the past, more than 35 million African men, women, and children were the victims of the transatlantic slave trade, which is one of the darkest chapters in human history. And this tragedy also included the British overseas territories, such as Bermuda. When you look at ourselves, roughly 60% of Black Bermudians are of African ancestry, many of whom are descendants of West Indian and West African slaves brought here during the 17th century. Britain had banned the trading of slaves directly from Africa by implementing the Slave Trade Act in 1807. The Slavery Abolishment Act of 1833 abolished slavery throughout the British overseas territories, including Bermuda. Then we have the Emancipation Act, which is the freeing of someone from slavery, and that was enacted on August 1st, 1834 in Bermuda and Antigua. And other British overseas territories received theirs later on in 1838. According to the UNESCO World Heritage, research concluded that 15 enslaved men of African descent are credited with being the first to explore Bermuda in the early 1500s. They came here with one Bermudez, and in 1603, that year, Captain Diego Ramirez beached his ship for repairs at Spanish Point, and the first named Black African set foot in Bermuda, and that was Venturilla. He was among the crew during the discovery of the islands by the Spanish. And every time I look at this, I just think I can imagine what it was like. They hear this Isle of Devils, they don't know what's going on, all sorts of ships are disappearing, there are noises coming out, the ship is wrecked, we aren't good, we're going to send a Black guy, he's expendable. So Venturilla wound up here as the first named Black African seaman to set foot in Bermuda. And to date, we have a Bermuda government ferry named after him, Venturilla. Now, in 1609, it has been recorded that 2 indigenous Native Americans were on the Sea Venture, which shipwrecked in Bermuda with the first English settlers. And then in 1616, a Negro and an indigenous Native American were sent to this island as indentured servants to dive for pearls. I'm not sure how successful that was. However, they became the first Black permanent residents. The evidence concerning lifetime servitude or slavery for Blacks and Indians is not clearly defined in Bermudian historical sources, but it's during the 1620s that references to Blacks and Indians changed from 7 years of indentured servitude to lifetime servitude. And that basically meant if you were indentured for 99 years upon your death, quite possibly your children carried out the rest of your service, and more than likely their children as well. This devastating change brought the Black people to our lowest state of servitude, chattel slavery, movable property. So when Bermuda needed a workforce, slavery was implemented on the island, and the Blacks and the Indians were made to be company slaves or free labor, which was essential to Bermuda's economy. Then, in 1623, they had a law, the Insolence of Negroes. It instituted restrictions on the movements of and commerce of free Blacks. They couldn't make money, they couldn't go anywhere, And however, in spite of the small size of this island and the limited number of places to hide, there was a significant number of slave uprisings. The earliest recorded revolt took place in 1656. However, once this plot was discovered, all free Blacks and problematic whites were deported to the Bahamas. Then 5 years later, Irish indentured and Black enslaved people plotted again together, and this resulted in the establishment of a night watch. So throughout Bermuda's history, there were a number of enslaved conspiracies focusing on freedom as the principal objective. They were always discovered in their infancy and before the onset of violence and bloodshed. And records indicate that the major revolts, and I'm just saying major revolts because there were small ones in between, I'm quite certain. But they took place in 1656, 1661, 1673, 1682, 1730, and in 1761. In 1761, a conspiracy was discovered that involved the majority of the Blacks on this island. 6 enslaved people were executed, and every single Black celebration was prohibited. Enslaved sales were held in St. George's until 1793. They were banned in 1807, and in 1834, the enslaved people were emancipated. So in this presentation, you will learn about early African Bermuda enslavement history, the stories of emancipation within the African diaspora heritage trail context. We can't change the past, but we can learn from it to make a better future, because we are the survivors of the African ethnocide.
Wow, thanks, Gina. That was awesome. And quite interesting that you used the word ethnocide, because you never really heard that word. You heard genocide, you heard Holocaust, but you never heard ethnocide. You could explain what that means?
Well, yes, ethnocide is it particularly describes what happened to Black people. It described what happened to us. Ethnocide means a deliberate and systematic destruction of the culture of an ethnic group. Think about that, deliberate, systematic destruction of the culture of an ethnic group. And it makes you wonder, why are we still searching about our history because it was deliberately and systematically destroyed. Ethnocide.
Wow, thank you, Gianna. That was very interesting. Thank you for that.
There's also a word from the Swahili language, maafa, which
Yeah,
means great disaster,
yeah.
and speaks to, it was just that. It was disastrous. It was catastrophic. West and Central Africa were depopulated. You know, people ripped by the millions from their homelands. And it is that fundamental invasion and breaking of a nation, of a continent, that made possible the tremendous capitalist development of today's so-called advanced capitalist nations. I'm thinking England, United States, Canada, all of these places, Germany, Italy, Belgium, especially with 1884 and 85, with the carving up of the continent of Africa during the Berlin Conference, right? So again, and bringing it right up to 2020, the slayings of Breonna Taylor and Philando Castile and Trayvon Martin, and on and on and on and on. So the Ma'afa lets us know that this is ongoing. This disaster, this assault on African humanity is very much a current modern day reality. It's not just something that happened on slave ships many hundreds of years ago. We are still dealing with the afterlife of the great calamity, the Ma'afa.
Wow. Thank you, Jala. Yeah, that's excellent. It brings a lot into question because, yeah, like you said, that even though that happened, and many people would say, oh, slavery, that happened so long ago. Why are you talking about it now? And like you said, a lot of that behavior and everything, even some of us even pass it on to each other, and it continues on and on and on until we actually deal with it and we start to have conversations, even about slavery, all different things. And they're, you know, like everyday conversations and not something that people are like, oh my God, why are they talking about that? So I understand. That's really interesting, and thanks you guys for that explanation. So we're gonna move on to the next segment, which is about Mary Prince. And as you guys, most of you guys would probably say, who is Mary Prince? You know, we heard so much about Mary Prince, especially lately here in the news, even in the UK. You know, a lot of people are really studying her enslaved narrative because people want to know. And so therefore, we're just going to give you some information about Mary Prince. So research indicates that Mary Prince, she was born enslaved in Bermuda in 1785. Her parents were enslaved. Her father, he was named Prince, and he was enslaved by the Triminims, and he was known to be a master carpenter, and he built many famous Bermuda sloops, and he lived in the area of Crow Lane. Her mother was named Sue, and she was a domestic enslaved of Captain Miners. Mary had siblings, and they were all enslaved in Bermuda. Mary had 5 slave owners, and they were all Bermudian. Mary Prince was the first enslaved Black woman to give her enslaved narrative to the Anti-Slavery Society in London, England. And it was published in 1831. And it was put into a book called The History of Mary Prince, a West Indian Slave. And it brought to light the horrendous crime of slavery. And it assisted with the abolishment of slavery acts in the British overseas territories, which included Bermuda. And these acts passed in Britain's Parliament in August 1833. And the enslaved in Bermuda received emancipation on August 1st, 1834. And just a question for you guys in the audience, you could put in the chat here, what's the holiday that we celebrate for August 1st, 1834? So if some of you guys want to put in the chat there. And as you guys know, that this year again will be the first year that we actually are going to be celebrating the second day of the holiday in her name, and it's going to be called Mary Prince Day. Right. So actually, usually we're on a bus tour around this time, but of course, because of COVID and other things, we've decided to bring this presentation as a webinar because we feel the information is very important. We actually usually visit, we stop at a house. This house is called Schoolin's Cottage. It's directly across from Dendytown, and it is owned by the Bermuda National Trust. And in 2018, the Bermuda National Trust unveiled a plaque in honor of Mary Prince and her contribution towards freedom. According to her enslaved narrative, though, Mary explains how she was sold to slave owners in Bermuda, and then she was also sold to plantations in the Grand Turk Island and Antigua. She also became a Christian. She was married, and she also learned how to read and write. Mary was taken by her slave owners to England, and she had conflict with them, and they put her out of the house. And she was known to have made friends with other people in England, and they actually introduced her to the Anti-Slavery Society, where she met a Mr. Thomas Pringle and a Miss Susanna Strickland, and they transcribed her story. It was stated that at that time, the book caused such a commotion at a time when anti-slavery agitation was growing, and her first personal account touched many people. And in the first year, all of the books printing, all of the story of the printings actually sold out. They sold out actually several times. Every time it was printed, it sold out. The book was actually published in 1831, and the abolishment of slavery throughout the British overseas territories, which included Bermuda, came into effect in August 1833. And the Emancipation Acts, which means freeing someone from slavery, was enacted through the British overseas territories again, which included Bermuda and Antigua at that time, on August 1st, 1834. The other British overseas territories received theirs in 1838. In 2012, Mary Prince was inducted as a Bermuda National Hero. Her book is still around today, and it could be purchased at places like the Griot, Brown and Company, and it could even be purchased on Amazon. And it is called The History of Mary Prince, a West Indian Slave. So just also to add to Mary Prince, as I had said earlier, that many people read her book and because it's quite interesting. Her story, as many people say, it brings to light the history. It also creates a space for change. Perhaps Mary's story can also help to better understand colonial enslavement, if most people don't understand. And it could also, in many ways, and this is quite interesting, but in many ways, after reading it, it could also create a space for healing from trauma, which is associated with much of its afterlife. And as Ajala had mentioned earlier, even today, it's still a lot of trauma, especially in the Black community. So that's part of what we want to share with her. Panel, do you guys want to share anything about Mary Prince?
Yeah, I have something to share as well, but I'll let you take that question. Someone asked, why was Bermuda and Antigua emancipated earlier than the rest?
Okay. Jolly, you want to answer that?
Yeah, Bermuda and Antigua came to emancipation 4 years earlier than the other territories for two reasons. They thought themselves capable of handling their Negroes, quote unquote. And the second reason, especially in Bermuda, is that they wanted their money. And so they made that grand tabulation of, how many enslaved Africans I own and what is their value, because I wanted to get my paper. I wanted to get my money. I wanted to get my reparations for the impending loss of my property, right? So that's the reason why they received emancipation 4 years early on August 1st, 1834.
I have another question. With regards to that picture I see here, with an image of a woman on her knees, as you know, in this day and time, that picture could be quite problematic, as you know, with George Floyd and a lot of other things which are going on now in our society. I've seen that picture used for so many other things. Any type of slave story, any type of story, they always use that picture. Where do you guys think that picture came from? Because I was just wondering, why would they pick that type of image?
Oh, it's a grand and glorious white supremacist liberal fiction. That's what it is. The abolitionists, let me disabuse the listeners of any notion that white abolitionists were somehow anti-racist. Nothing could be further from the truth. They didn't think of themselves on an equal footing as far as humanity was concerned with those who were in bondage, right? It was very much a paternalistic relationship. Oh, look at these suffering Negroes, you know? And so out of that very warped perspective of Black humanity comes propaganda, problematic propaganda, abolitionist propaganda at that, that this picture is really emblematic of. The idea of a Black person on their knees, because there's the twin image with the male asking the same question, am I not a man and a brother, right? Our history shows we weren't ones to be on our knees begging those who have proven themselves to be completely lacking in a functioning conscience for our liberty. We took it by our hand. We took it while fighting on our feet. So to misrepresent Africans in general, because this image isn't just used for as a stand-in for Mary Prince, but you see it time and time again, as Brother Vincent said, in stories related to slavery and enslavement, you know, across the board. It's a revisionist fiction that has no bearing on the truth. Mary Prince, if you read her book, was no shrinking violet. She would never have been caught dead on her knees. So this is a grievous misrepresentation, but it is at the same time a soothing racist fiction that made white liberal, white supremacist abolitionists feel good about themselves and the service that they were giving to these poor Black and backward savages.
Exactly. Thank you, Jala. I'd just like to add on top of that, research taken from Cyril Packwood's book, Chained on the Rock, Slavery in Bermuda, it actually answers both questions that were asked. Why was Bermuda and Antigua emancipated? And also the question about why is she on her knees? And this right here sums it up totally. And I'm just going to share this with you guys. Right from out of Cyril Packwood's book. And it says, the Legislative Council and the House were quick to respond to Governor Chapman's address. Robert Kennedy, president of the Legislative Council, said that the legislators appreciated the judicious and liberal spirit manifested by His Majesty's government and the British Parliament. The law provided compensation for the proprietors, as Ajala mentioned earlier, and enfranchisement for the slaves, the enslaved. He also went on to say that Bermudian enslaved people had been treated by their masters with paternal care and kindness. In addition, religious instruction had prepared them for their peaceful acceptance of freedom. Other white speakers went on to say that the white folks were generally kind to the slaves. So I just wanted to just share that with you guys. So just sharing with you guys, part of this talk right here is we're not going off in opinions. These are facts that have been stated. This was written down actually in the House of Parliament of how they felt about it. Like Ajala said earlier, they wanted to get their money, and but they felt that the Bermudian enslaved people, because of their religious instruction, they and the enslaved owners felt as if they would behave better than those left down south, really.
Yeah, I heard you just say compensation. The people that kept Black people enslaved got compensation. So you're talking about the Black people that in Bermuda that kept people enslaved, talking about the Tuckers, the Dickinsons, the Coxes, and all the other ones, Aswoods, and so on. But you said compensation. What type of compensation did these people get?
We plan to share it later on in the presentation, But in Bermuda, 50,000 pounds in compensation was shared out amongst the Bermudian enslaved earners. If you guys want to research that, that's also in Cyril Packwood's book, Chained on the Rock, Slavery in Bermuda. And he actually has it itemized on how much they receive for each enslaved person. And not only is it in Cyril Packwood's book, Chained on the Rock, Slavery in Bermuda, you could actually go to the Bermuda government archives to also get the information as well too.
Okay, great. I also see someone just wrote a comment here. Can you please comment on the kind of slavery nonsense that many of us had heard through our lives, that somehow slavery in Bermuda was less brutal? So I guess she's referring to, we heard the stories, sorry, of people saying that slavery was benign in Bermuda. Can you guys elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, that's
I
again.
like when Dallas explains that one. Go ahead for that, John. I love when you do that one.
It's a malicious fiction that's spun by people who claim to be historians. People like, and I believe in naming, and you know, they are proud enough to write the garbage, so they should be able to stand by it. Virginia Bernhard, Professor Virginia Bernhard, she trumpets this nonsense in her book. Slaves and Slavery in, I forget the title, but look up Virginia Bernhard and you see this similar refrain, as well as in the work of Michael, his last name escapes me, but he wrote In the Eye of All Trade. I believe that's the name of the book. There's William Zool is another one who made these outrageous claims that somehow slavery was, slaves and slaveholders in Bermuda, that somehow the proximity, and Michael, I forget his name, in the Eye of All Trade, he made mention of the idea that physical proximity produced a different sort of relationship between the enslaver, rapist, and his enslaved property, his or her enslaved property. That nothing could be further from the truth. My being close to the person who is the architect of my living hell simply means that he or she has more immediate access to my body, to carrying out any number of vile depredations on me. Why? Because I am right there. I'm not way over yonder in the fields. I'm in the house quite often, right? So access means that, especially in the example of Captain Ingham and his wife Mary at Schoollands Lane, where Mary Prince witnessed pregnant Hetty being beaten to death. And, you know, this happened because slavery is hell. Wherever you are on the planet as an enslaved person, your experience is of necessity hellish, right? Of necessity. So this idea that Bermudian slavery is somehow qualitatively different from, say, the hell that was experienced in Barbados or the hell that was experienced in Antigua or any of the British colonies anywhere is a fundamentally untrue statement. We can look at Gibbet Island, and Gibbet Island, where the head's able to speak, because that's where they used to, and not just in Gibbet Island, but other places around the island. If the heads that were affixed to stakes along Gibbet Island were able to speak, they would issue a resounding hell no to the idea that slavery in Bermuda was somehow, to take a phrase from former President George Herbert Walker Bush first, kinder, gentler, 1,000 points of light form of enslavement, a bondsman's or a bondswoman's paradise. Again, nothing could be further from the truth. And those who spread that fiction, I think, are trying to absolve their white ancestors of any culpability for bringing into existence the sort of monstrosity that one had to be in order to visit the sort of evil upon an entire people for hundreds of years. You had to be some special kind of monster in order to do that. So again, the act of absolving their ancestors of any guilt, of any culpability in the commission of that major crime against humanity. I think that is the underpinnings of this constant refrain in a lot of the scholarship put out by white historians in particular.
Exactly. Thank you, Jala. That's
And by the way, Ajala, I know that you're writing a book, and Rashida was sharing with me a picture that you have on the book. Rather than a Mary Prince being on her knees, I say you chose a different image.
Because images are powerful, right? They communicate. Remember, we talked about the iconography in Kemet and the iconography that constitutes the Adinkra corpus. Well, images tell a story. When we look at this picture, for example, we see a Black woman looking straight ahead, looking us in the face, right? Very stoic. And if you can imagine, I would like to think that the artist, who's a brilliant Black woman by the name of Vanessa Turner, a local, she very much captured the spirit and the essence of Mary Prince. Mary Prince is a powerful Black woman, just as many Black Bermudian women are. So this is one of our ancestors, and she should be represented as she was, rather than as some sort of abolitionist fiction that she most certainly was not. She was not a woman on her knees.
Yeah, most definitely she wasn't. And I just want to add to the question, you know, where that last question was slavery relatively less brutal. You guys could, every day people are in town. You go across Sally Bassett. What they did to her. I mean, she was literally burnt alive. She was burnt at the stake. That was her sentence, to be burnt at the stake. So I just wanted to just share that with you guys. And her story is quite fascinating as well, too. So does, Gina, you want to share anything?
I was just going to say, and if it was so benign, then there would not have been all of those revolts. Think about it. You don't revolt if things are lovely, do you?
Yeah, absolutely.
If I can just throw in the conspiracy of 1761, more than half of the honest population conspired to kill every last white person on the island, man, woman, and child, and to bathe the grass of this island with their blood, to turn it crimson. So if it were really so benign, as these propagandists claiming to be historians have been wont to say, then that shouldn't have been, you know, something that was in the minds of at least 2,000 Black people here in Bermuda, right? But it was. So again, history and the actions taken by our ancestors tells a decidedly different tale. Benign enslavement wouldn't have have resulted in the conspiracy of 1761. It wouldn't have happened if this were a quote unquote slave's paradise.
Exactly. And I think it was 6 of them that they had found for that, right, Jala? And they killed all of them, right? Yeah, Mike.
There were five men and one woman named Nancy. And even though the conspiracy of 1761 no doubt encompassed more than just half a dozen conspirators, Black Bermuda held its collective tongue. So nobody said nothing, no snitching, right? No snitching. And as a result, only 5 men and 1 woman were ultimately found guilty, hanged, and burned.
Great. So there's a question here. Some have debated that Sally Bassett should not be celebrated because she was a criminal. What would you say to that? I'd like to answer first, Charles. First of all, folks, Sally Bassett, she was an enslaved woman. I myself, she's very much a favorite for me because I've been one of those people who have gone right down to the government archives and researched her information. I've read the entire court case. And I'll tell you, you want to know who's the criminal? I read the entire court case. Sarah Sally Bassett, she was viewed as a healer to the enslavement community because she knew a lot of how the botanicals plants and how they could heal you and different things like that. She knew many things on a lot of the healing, but she also knew how a lot of things can poison you. She wasn't fixed on being a Christian. She was not fixed on following the status quo her. She was not fixed on the religion in this country. So it's always the people, of course, at that time, they could change the story around to say that, yes, she poisoned me. But what was their fear of her? That's what you have to say. And that's why it's so important. I tell people, do your research, because many people say many things. And just like Ajala said, unfortunately, we've had a lot of, especially white people, who's been historians and they've written history. But then again, we as Black people, we have to understand that, I don't mean to be disrespectful, many of us people of color and Black people here, we didn't come on the ship. We weren't welcome on the ship. Many of us came here as enslaved people. So we have to, that research that's in front of us, we have to question it. And we have to go research ourselves. And that's what I did to pull her story out, because she had a story all on her end. So she was not a criminal. You know, they were very terrified of her, but I guess it's to his perspective. You know, she was then, like I said, a healer in her community. And, so I would advise folks to do their own research on her. But you could go ahead, Jala.
Yeah, even if she had killed, because she only poisoned, she did not kill anyone. Even if she had been successful in killing, and not just the Fosters, but 1,000 white people, including children, she still wouldn't have been guilty of a single crime, because the criminal, the person, the aggressor, the violator, were the enslaver rapists. Those who were the architects of a system of chattel slavery that robbed African people, or that sought to rob African people of their humanity. So in her pursuit of the reclamation and or defense of her own humanity, anything that she did was justified. Why? Because anything that she would do would be an act of self-defense against the original aggressors. So if their children ended up being poisoned, well, that wasn't a crime, that's on them. And she would have been acting in self-defense. If she had beheaded her enslaver, Mr. Dickinson of Southampton, she would have been acting in self-defense. If she had razed properties to the ground and burned the inhabitants therein, she would have been guilty of no crime. Again, because the original criminal and the system of criminality, white supremacy, chattel slavery, was the and the only criminal in this matter. Sally Bassett is innocent of any crime. In fact, any enslaved person who took the law into his or her own hands, quote unquote, would have been guilty of committing no offense.
And I would also like to add to that as well, to the person who asked that question. If you were taken from your home right now, you and your children, and taken to a foreign land, I'm pretty sure you would try to do anything. You would kill, you would fight, you won't stop, you will resist. You wouldn't just go willingly. So there's no way you will be trying to be called a criminal if someone called you a criminal for trying to be free. It definitely won't happen. And just now, Ajala said something, enslave a rapist, you know, and I'm gonna let Ajala elaborate on that a bit.
Well, it's important to call a thing, right? I think the Chinese say that's the beginning of wisdom. The people who came over and despoiled civilizations, who raped en masse women, men, and children, who invaded and kidnapped en masse, kidnapped the Africans in Central West Africa, who violated the land for hundreds of years. That's exactly what they are. That's exactly what they did. They were enslaver rapists, right? They weren't settlers. They weren't explorers. They weren't adventurers, right? And I even take a bit of issue with the term slave masters. That seems a bit too clean a term. right? It doesn't immediately remind us of the monstrosity behind the practice of chattel slavery. So I think it's always good to be precise in our language and to use terminology that most accurately reflects, in this case, what these European invader rapists actually did when engaging with African people, when engaging with civilizations, right? Because they were savages who came over and despoiled civilizations. They didn't encounter savagery. They encountered civilizations and behaved in ways that can only be described as bestial. So let's call a thing a thing. They were enslaver rapists.
Exactly. Thank you, Jala. So we'll move on to the next part. But I just had one last comment. Yes, as the lady, someone commented here, they just wanted to get a perspective because they have a debate with people. I mean, the crime is slavery. Slavery is the crime. The institutional white supremacy is the crime. They kept her hostage. She was held, as Winston said, she was held and, she couldn't get away. So slavery was the crime. She was no criminal. It didn't matter, as Ajala said earlier, how many people she killed. Slavery was the crime. A crime was being committed against her, and she did what she felt was necessary. And even if you go further into the research, it's she didn't even poison them. But that's how much people know. Nobody really just goes to research her story. But unfortunately, we don't. I have to move on from that. But yeah, slavery is the crime. So we're just moving on to the next segment now, which is starting the stories of the friendly societies.
Okay, that's my cue. Good evening, and I'm back again. So we are going to the friendly societies, and basically these societies played a significant role in the history of Black Bermudians, particularly in the days of racial segregation just after emancipation took place. They provided social activity, they had forums for members, and they worked to develop leadership and political skills of the newly freed Black persons. In the 19th century, these friendly societies, such as the Young Man's Friendly Institution, they had several branches throughout Bermuda in several parishes. They filled needs such as schools, healthcare, businesses. They organized gift clubs. Later on, we'll be talking about Richard Tucker during the Bars Park presentation concerning the enterprise. He was a member of the Friendly Society. So, and they came about out of importance because in 1833, the total population of Bermuda was 9,195 people. Of that, 4,297 were white and 4,898 were Black. So in August 1833, when the British government passed an act for the abolishment of slavery throughout the British territories, which included Bermuda, on August 1st, that's when they received the emancipation, that's Bermuda and Antigua, from the British overseas territories. And that's when the friendly societies came into play. So I'm going to read the Emancipation Act of 1834. I find it interesting because it really makes you ponder about what it says and what occurred in Bermuda sharply after that, long after that, even up to this day for the most part. Whereas it is expedient to relieve free Blacks and free persons of color from certain disabilities, liabilities, and restrictions to which they are now subject, to extend to them the laws now applicable to white persons, and to fix the qualifications for voters and the electors, and for candidates for certain offices and places of trust. Be it therefore enacted by the Governor, Council, and Assembly of the Bermudas or Somers Islands as follows. Extensions of rights, privileges, and franchises. All rights, privileges, and franchises which upon and from and after 1st August 1834 shall or may be enjoyed by white persons shall upon, from, and after 1st August 1834 be equally enjoyed by free Black and colored persons, and upon from and after 1st August 1834, all free black and colored persons shall be subject to and liable to all the pains, penalties, duties, conditions, restrictions, disabilities, and liabilities to which white persons shall be subject and liable. That's 1834. So on August 1st, 1834, two acts of parliament came into effect in Bermuda. The first abolished slavery, while the second gave blacks the same rights and freedoms as whites. Yet none of these acts provided any resources for these newly freed black people. So they consequently became trapped in this cycle of unemployment and poverty. And after after 200 years of enslavement, it's no surprise that although they had been legally made the equals of whites and whites, that there was an economic and social disparity between the two. So the friendly societies came about to meet the needs. Now, Winston mentioned this earlier, that when slavery was abolished throughout the British overseas territories in 1834, there was a compensation payout of 20 million Great British pounds through the enslavers throughout the British overseas territories, including Bermuda, as a reimbursement for the loss of the enslaved. So that meant every person that earned a slave was reimbursed for the loss of their property. Now remember, chattel slavery, movable property, we were in those times. And it's researchable. You can literally find the names of the slave owners and the persons whom they earned at those times, and you can see, everything about it. So this is basically all fact. Bermudian enslavers received 50,000 Great British pounds in compensation, and it was distributed by Nathaniel T. Butterfield. He went to England, he collected the funds, he returned, and he distributed them in Bermuda. To date, as of what's today, July 23rd, 2020, to date, nothing has ever been paid to the descendants of the slaves, of the enslaved individual, to date. Ponder that.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Gina. Yeah, that's quite interesting. Any of you guys, Charlie, you have anything you want to add to what Gina just spoke about?
Well, the rationale being that you don't pay restitution to livestock. And enslaved Africans in at least the white racist imaginary formulated this idea of African people as being non-humans. So it therefore logically followed that one would not be beholden to making any acts of restitution, financial or otherwise, to beings that were mere objects rather than human beings. So it's out of that spirit that the idea of paying restitution for lost property to enslaved rapists as a result of Emancipation's impending descent on the island of Bermuda made a lot of sense, and the movable property weren't paid a red cent. It absolutely makes all of it, it's just logic in that time. However, and this is the beauty of having African people speak for themselves, the actions of these enslaved human beings let everybody know that no. You may say we are livestock. You may say that we exist beyond the pale of what should be understood as the human. But we know we are human beings, and we will fight tooth and nail to ensure that our liberty is something that is crafted by our own hands. And if need be, we will bathe this land in your blood. So these actions are actions taken by African captives who were still very much autonomous beings and who were still very much committed to being the architects of their own destinies. right? These are things that human beings do when confronted by the forces of oppression. They resist. So if we recognize through our ancestors' eyes that they were human beings then they were owed reparations that have to date not been paid. We, who are the human beings, the African human beings of today, are owed the reparations that were created by the labor, forced labor over hundreds of years of our shackled ancestors. That's a bill that still must be paid because we were human beings then. We deserve the payment that our forced labor, the forced labor of our forebears, produced. Now, when we make that case, we're not talking about pennies or billions or even trillions. We're talking about the wealth of nations that made possible for example, the Industrial Revolution. The capitalist explosion was a capitalist explosion that exploded upon our ancestors' black backs. We as their descendants are deserving of the accumulated wealth passed down over generations, over hundreds of years that their labor produced. So what am I talking about here? I'm talking about the end of whiteness as we know it and white wealth as we know it. I'm talking about a fundamental shift in the power balance in the world. So we're not just talking about billions or trillions here. So understand what we are asking for, not asking for. When we are ready, we will demand it. And when we are ready, we must take it. But that's another conversation for another time, I suppose.
Absolutely. Yes, Jala. Excellent. Thank you for that. Yeah, I just find it quite interesting myself as we continue to move on, but I just wanted to add to that, okay, so the Black people that are enslaved here for hundreds of years, from 1600s to the 1800s, you're enslaved, so that's 200 or so years. So there's people that enslave them, the enslavers, you have free labor. Then after the 1800s, they immediately get into what's called segregation. And that goes until like 1968, where Black people still have a difficulty with even getting a start. And then, you know, we have up until today, and it's just funny how some people say, oh, it happened so long ago. Oh, really? Really? I mean, segregation only ended in 1968. You know, they said these schools, our schools weren't even were made segregation in what, the 1970s? You know, it wasn't that long ago. And then we have Britain, compensation was paid out to these slave owners, 20 million pounds, which is probably a couple $2 billion in today. And Britain just paid off the debt. And many taxpayers in Britain were upset because the debt was just paid off in about 2015-16. You know, and that included the compensation that came to Bermuda, the 50,000 pounds in compensation. So I just find that all just quite interesting that some people would still say this happened so long ago, you need to get over it. So as we continue on here, earlier, so we'll finish with the question panel. You guys have any questions, or you guys are finished?
Yeah, someone just asked about where can they get information on about the compensation, the money, and where did it come from? Because as we know in history, in England, they didn't have the money.
Right.
And I'm going to send out some information on where the money came from to everybody that's on this presentation as well. Because as Rashida just mentioned, it didn't get paid off to 2015. And the money came from banks overseas, as well as wealthy people as well, like the Rothschild family. What's the other bank? Lloyd's of London, different banks as well. But I'll send that information on to everyone later after the presentation.
Yeah, and just to get to folks, if you wanted to know like the split out of the compensation and the exact amount of money, even the exact amount that went to the countries, all the Caribbean countries, Jamaica, Bermuda, all of them. Cyril Arterbridge Packwood's book, Chained on the Rock Slavery in Bermuda, pretty much in the back of his book, he has a part that has all of that information filled out there for you. And a lot of his research came from the actual archives as well too. And he did a lot of the research and it's right in that book right there. If you wanna, even just for the compensation payout, because many Britain people were upset, and they were highly upset, British people even today, because their tax, the money they paid for taxes went to paying off the slave debt. So you could Google that. I mean, you could, there's a lot of factual information, but it's been a lot of talk about it because many of them were really upset that they found out that their taxes went to pay off this slave debt. So as we continue on, we're moving on to the next story about the at Bars Bay Park. Charlie, you want to share that story?
Yeah, it's fascinating that wherever there is oppression, there's always resistance in so many creative ways. We organize, we fight back, because again, we rule ourselves. And our ancestors show that wherever there are challenges, we have a history of coming together and meeting those challenges head on. Well, the incident with the slave ship coming into Bars Bay Park, Bars Bay, is an example of that. On February 11th, 1835, the Enterprise, which was on its way from Virginia to South Carolina with a cargo of 78 enslaved Africans, was blown off course and during a storm. And running perilously low on supplies, it came into Bermuda waters. Now consider that 7 months earlier, the Emancipation had been granted here in Bermuda, August 1st, 1834. So when the Enterprise entered our waters and the customs authorities were made aware that there were enslaved Africans aboard, they refused to allow the ship to depart. Well, as information always does in small places, it spread like wildfire. Word traveled to the ears of the men and women of the Friendly Society, and one in particular, a gentleman by the name of Richard Tucker, and some of his colleagues took it upon themselves to entreat the Chief Justice, Thomas Butterfield, to bring a writ of habeas corpus. And basically, a writ of habeas corpus says that one must establish lawful grounds for the continued incarceration of a person, or establish legal grounds for them to be freed from imprisonment. Well, this Chief Justice, in the middle of the night, put 2 questions to each of the 78 African captives aboard the Enterprise. Do you want to continue on to the United States, where bondage will surely await you? Or do you want to remain here in Bermuda, where there is freedom for your kind? Of course, freedom, quote unquote, because we all know that post 1834, I would argue the freedom to which we are, that we would like to be enjoying, has yet to bear full fruit. But that's another conversation, I suppose, for another time. Well, of the 78, 72 decided to remain here in Bermuda. The 6 who decided to go on and continue on to return to the United States were a mother and her 5 children. Now, she made the decision to return to the United States and again to face, the whip, the chains, and plantation slavery because she had other children. And as we know, a mother's love is stronger than any other force known to humankind, stronger than even death itself. So obviously, slavery is not something that will make this mother turn away from her children. Right? Well, the story doesn't end there. because the company that owned the vessel, the Enterprise, brought a suit against the British government claiming illegal seizure of cargo. Again, remember, as my co-pilot Gina said at the outset, chattel, movable property, not human beings. So property had been illegally seized because the ship was under the US flag, and in the United States, slavery was still the order of the day. So they argued that in the international court that the seizure was illegal. Well, the courts ruled in favor of the shipping company, and the British government was forced to pay 17,000 pounds in restitution for, again, the illegal seizure of the 78 African captives. Again, those who were freed, again, freed, quote unquote, came into the care of the friendly societies. And as we'll find out shortly, the friendly societies were all about and committed fully to racial uplift, coming together in the face of racial discrimination, naked bigotry, and finding a way out of no way, pooling financial resources so that folk could be housed and employed and taken care of. So these men, women, and children, the 72 men, women, and children who chose to remain in Bermuda, were in the care of other Africans here in Bermuda under the umbrella of the Friendly Society, a group of men and women who had organized themselves into lodges dedicated, singularly dedicated to racial uplift and the betterment of African people post-emancipation. 175 years to the month that the Enterprise came into Bars Bay, the monument We Arrive was created by artist Chesley Trott. And it's a fitting tribute to those African men and women. Now, incidentally, and you'll see the itinerary, the cargo list, if you will. Of those 78, I spoke to Queen Quet, who's the queen of the Gullah Geechee Nation, running along the eastern seaboard of the United States. And she said to me that the folk on the boat were very much Gullah Geechee. So here we have in Bermuda a direct line between the Gullah Geechee Nation and Black Bermudians here. So our lineage is in part Gullah Geechee. So that is our connection, a very tangible ancestral connection to the Gullah Geechee here in Bermuda. And as you look at the cargo list, you'll see names that should be quite familiar to you. From Anderson to Brown to Gray. We still have these names here in Bermuda. James, Johnson, they're still here.
Yeah, excellent, Jala. Thank you for that. If you guys see your names, yeah, feel free to type down your names in the chat as well too. So just interest in her. If you guys look at the slide here, I'm sure some of you guys have looked at it. It's the last name. And this was actually as Ajala said earlier, and Gina, as the people were considered property, movable chattel property, that this was the list of what was on the Enterprise ship. And you guys can see it's the last name here, the first name, whether they were male or female, their age, and they colored them. Some of them, as you guys can see, they were copper, yellow, black. So they gave them colors. And as you guys could also probably see that many of them were children. You know, many of them were very, very young. And the Friendly Societies, Richard Tucker took the helm, and, you know, he wanted to ensure that they would be able to have freedom here in Bermuda in 1835. So as we continue on here, we're gonna start with the first part of a video with Manchester Lodge member Norbert Simmons, and him sharing his views on the Friendly Societies in Bermuda. And welcome, and guys, this is who I'm talking to now. His name is Norbert Simmons, and he is a member at the Manchester Lodge, and I'm going to just ask him a few questions as we're here doing the presentation based on emancipation. So one of the first questions I'd like to ask you, Norbert, is I guess if you could share with us a bit of the origins of the friendly societies, and I guess how you came to be a part of it.
Sure. The friendly societies really came active with emancipation after 1834, and that was a time when free blacks needed assistance. Really, you know, they were enslaved for many years. They had no places to live. They had no income. Many were without jobs after emancipation. They had no medical facilities. Those types of things, all those types of things were provided by their masters. So there were people in the community who had certain skills and certain talents. Some had been educated a bit, but not many of them. So they pooled their resources, and they started to meet on a regular basis. And this was throughout the island. Many communities had lodges. There were several lodges in every community, really. Somerset had maybe a dozen, 8 to 10 lodges alone in Somerset. In my time, I can remember at least 4 black lodges being active in Somerset. So they pooled the resources, and they were the first schools for black people, the first churches, the first places where people assembled for social activities like fetes and weddings and funerals and those types of things. So those were the humble beginnings of the lodges. Many of them had their beginnings in the United States, in England. The lodge I'm part of is Manchester Unity Lodge, which came from Manchester in England, and there are 2 lodges in here. I'm a member of the one in Somerset, Loyal Irresistible, that's located on Main Street in Somerset, Main Road, Somerset Road, 49 Main, Somerset Road, I think it's that address, opposite from Mr. Chicken, on the corner there. That's my lodge, and it's in disrepair. Been in disrepair since a hurricane 3 years ago. And I'm also a member, and we need to get that building fixed up. You know, it's historically it's the building. Membership is low. We're without funds, without insurance, so we need to do something because it's a fine representation of an old lodge, black lodge building. Then a member of another one in hand. That lodge movement was started, I think, in 1884. That building was built. The first lodge was run at Mangrove Bay, where the Trimminghams is. Well, former Trimminghams. Michael Scott's house is there now. Former Trimminghams, the Perch. And that lodge was built and consecrated in 1902. That's how long it's been there. And the tower where the clock is was added at a later time. But the lodge was opened in 1902. I'm also a member of the Manchester Unity Lodge in Hamilton, which is located on the corner of Union and Victoria Street, opposite People's Pharmacy. And that lodge was started in 1779. It's been at that site for 100 and a couple of years. I'm not sure the exact date. But that was a fine example of a black institution, a lodge, and an opera house. Where the parking lot is beside the lodge was an opera house. It was a building where shows and plays and stuff were held. It burnt down in the 70s, I guess it was. Major fire. It was never rebuilt. But that was the Colonial Opera House, a fine place where people went out in their finery to plays and those types of things. So I'm a member of that lodge. I'm a member there because my lodge in Somerset is not active. We haven't been active for a number of years. Our membership is very low, and so we haven't been meeting. In fact, the membership in most lodges are low. So we We need some type of revival. And the low because the need for lodges and the need for the social interaction that we needed, that we had and our forefathers needed, is not there, not thrown. Since integration, you can go anywhere, do anything. Those were the places I mentioned. You had your concerts and your plays and your weddings and your parties and celebrations and that. But now you can go anywhere. These young people, they will go on Princess. You know, they're good. They're good. You say go to lodge? No, they don't go to lodges. They go to these other places and nightclubs and celebrate, and understandably. And that happened during my youth. But my parents and my grandparents' time, those were the places that we frequent.
Right. So you think it was probably like you said, a lot of people's not a part of them anymore. So you think it had a lot to do with when integration started to happen a bit more in Bermuda? Okay, because integration started in, I think it was 1960. When we had desegregation, 1968, 69, yeah.
And things were opening up before that. I mean, before that, you could go certain places and do certain things. But I can recall when you really couldn't. You know, I'm 70 years old. I'm in the 71st year, and I could recall very little of it. But certainly the stories from my parents and grandparents and the experiences that they had, you know, it was very evident. Things change, so there's no need for the younger persons there's no real interest, unless people are interested in historically, or because of the parents had a part in it, or the grandparents, you know, and with them, these younger people would be the great grandparents, because that's how far back it goes. And you recall nothing much is known. This is why you've got it. People have to be educated. The tours that you gave for the Cedar Bridge High School this year at the lodge, you saw what little information they had. They didn't know much of their background. Yeah. And they all, you know, places like that, they always wondered what was in there. But when we were coming along, we knew that was a lodge room. And you may not have been permitted because it's somewhat of a secret society what goes on in there. But you knew it was a lodge room, and you may have gone in there for some social activity. You know, I was attracted to it. My parents, my grandparents, and my great grandparents were lodge people, and I was a juvenile. I remember dressing up to go when we were all white, in summer uniform. I had on white shorts and white top and white shoes and white socks, I guess, going to Sunday activity, and that was with the Grand United Order of Odd Fellows in Somerset. The Grand United Order is different. There's several orders. The Grand United is another order different from Manchester Unity, and there were more Grand United orders than others. There's one on Main Road in Somerset. That's where the Jehovah's Witness Church is. Next to Summer Style, the hairdressing parlor just down from St. James's Church. That's Grand United. The next one is, and that's called the Victoria and Albert Lodge. That one is in Somerset Grand United. Another one is in Hamilton, and that is on Court Street next to HSBC, Church Street Bank. That is Alexandrina Grand United Lodge. And then the other Grand United is in St. George's, Somers Lodge. That's Grand United. That's where the old St. George Theater was. Yeah, and it shows what they did, because, and then that's something that the lodges did do. During days of integration, we had our own movie houses. You know, the Grand United in Somerset, the Victoria and Albert, that was the movies. We saw movies. Somers Playhouse in St. George's, we went there for movies. Similarly, I think with Alexandrina in Hamilton, we went there. But those were the activities that were put on for people of color, for our people.
Yeah, because it's quite interesting that, like, you started so many things, especially started from your lodges, like you said, the movies, and then you had mentioned even insurance, and you know, what's the other thing?
I'm sure the movies were held by the others too, but we weren't permitted to attend those movies.
Right,
so we created our own.
Exactly.
create their own theaters. And then
Exactly.
in time, the businesses, the oligarchy took over the theaters, like the Sands Theater
Mm-hmm.
and the Summers Playhouse Theater in St. George's, and they ran them. They
Right.
rented them from us and then ran them. Well, that was during integration. But I can remember the
Right.
integration in Somerset. I can remember that when you went to movies in when I was a kid, you only could sit certain places. We sat
Right.
downstairs. You couldn't sit
Right.
upstairs.
And that
Even
was all part of, like, I guess that was the other thing with, that's later on came with even the theater boycotts. That was part of the movement.
that was part of that.
That,
Yeah, that
so,
that 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 was the crux of the boycott.
right.
Not in for the theaters. There are places like Island Theater. I remember going there. Rosebank wasn't built then, but Island Theater in Somerset. You go in Somerset on the right hand side, the back
Right.
section. That was the place for the white set. And I
Yeah.
remember sitting there one time. I was curious why nobody sat there, and nobody said anything. But I got all these looks for from persons that were sitting there, because that's not generally where black people sat.
Oh,
And
okay.
then I understood what it was about. I was told after that. That's what
Okay.
I thought it was something like that. I thought it was a special. I thought it was a reserve section. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was reserved, but you didn't have to reserve it. That's where people were white set.
Yeah. Did somebody actually come into the theater to you and tell you that you had to move your seat?
No,
No.
not then.
Okay.
Not then. But I was getting so many looks there. And I remember getting up to go to the bathroom or go to the Foley store across the street for some refreshment or go out dinner for refreshment. And I sat someplace else. I didn't sit in that section because I felt really uncomfortable. I
Well,
went down
imagine that.
further.
And you know what's so fascinating about this is, and with everybody on the presentation, is that you're somebody who experienced that. You got to experience it, because a lot
Yep.
of us of a generation of we didn't experience any of these
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
So we hear these stories, but that's what we appreciate so very much with people like yourself, is that you get to you actually experienced it,
Yeah.
and you
Island
can actually share this with us.
Island Theater, you sit down in Island Theater and those up in the balcony throw popcorn down on you.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe I've heard people throw, bags or other litter going down, but I remember the popcorn experience being thrown over.
Right. But getting back to the lodges, and so I remember, like, of hearing that, yeah, like you said, the insurance. So how did the insurance started with the Friendly Society?
Insurance started with the Friendly
But
Society.
how did it end up with the Bermuda government? How did it end up with Bermuda government?
Well, because
I mean, not Bermuda, but how did it? Bermuda
how the government take
eventually
it over.
passed legislation to say that people had to be insured, and then insurance companies like Colonial and stuff like that.
What happened? The insurance, we started it because, as I said, the largest institutions where we socialized, we were educated, we went for religious persons, but also for economic, financial reasons. Gift clubs were started.
Yes, gift clubs.
And the gift clubs were places where you paid a weekly dues. It may have been, a threepence, a penny a week, and you paid that every week. And what the gift club did do, it did provide you with benefits. You got, in the event if you were sick, you got a benefit, a stipend with the proof of a doctor's certificate. You present it to the gift club, you'd get a stipend. You get something that week to assist you because you're unemployed. And so that continued. And also at the if an insured of a member of the gift club passed away, his family would get a death benefit, like death insurance, right? Like insurance, life insurance. They get a death benefit, something small, a few pounds, but they get that. And in addition to those benefits, in terms of unemployment or sick benefit and death benefit, there was also a savings component where there was a savings program where you got an interest on your investment.
Oh wow, you got interest. Okay.
You got small interest on your investment, yeah. And and get back to regular gift club. The regular gift club at the year end, when you paid so much a week, depending on the number of deaths and the number of sickness claims, there was a residual left over from what your money, and that was shared between the membership.
Right.
So, you know, the more deaths and the more sickness, the less of a share that you got the year end. But whatever was left, that was shared between the membership. And it wasn't much. Most people would roll it over for the next year,
Right.
for part of the year, you know. But in addition to that, it was, as I said, a savings program. And at the year end, you got your savings, less a small administration fee, your savings plus interest, less a small administration fee. And you got that each year. There were people who because we couldn't bank.
Right.
We couldn't go to banks. You know, if you didn't keep it under your mattress, you know, you had a gift club or you had a hand club.
Yeah.
That's where hand clubs came.
So black people were not allowed to have accounts in the bank, or they were not allowed to go to
not
the
in
bank?
the 1800s.
Okay.
No, not in the 1800s.
But yeah, you're informing us, because like a lot of people of us, our generation, we didn't know, because we're the generation who were always able to have bank accounts.
Not after emancipation, we weren't allowed to do anything. I mean, they weren't accustomed we weren't accustomed to banks. We never needed a bank.
Yeah.
We never got a wage. We never had any savings. We were enslaved people.
Exactly.
So we had no control of our destiny. We had no need for money.
Right.
We were fed, we were housed, we were clothed, you know. So we had no need. And that's where the gift clubs kicked in and started the financial aspect that assists us with our finances.
Right. Okay, great. So we have another portion to play from Mr. Simmons's video, and we'll just be playing that shortly. But as we continue on with more stories of the friendly societies and also the lodges, if you guys look at this slide right here, this is actually a derelict building right here, but this was previously called the Lane School. It's actually located next to the Bermuda Underwater Exploration Institute. At this time, it's a private home that's owned by someone, but directly next to there, you wouldn't really see it from the East Broadway side. You would actually have to walk on the side and actually look down into the water side to see the new property there. So although slavery was abolished in 1834, many newly freed Blacks faced great obstacles because of the lack of access to education and support from the Bermuda government at that time. The organization that came to assist was, as Norbert, Mr. Simmons said on the video, to assist the newly freed Blacks immediately after emancipation, was the Friendly Societies. Emancipation, because we have to remember that emancipation came from the British government at that time and not the Bermuda government. And therefore the Bermuda government did not have any type of resources in place for these newly freed people. They didn't have any type of financial, educational, any type of social opportunities in place to assist the newly freed Black people out of slavery and to be able to conduct productive lives in Bermuda. So next to the Bermuda Underwater Exploration Institute, there's this property that's on the slide right here, but of course it's a brand new house right now. The property is actually called Moonray Manor. And it, like I said, it's down in the fall and it's very close to the water side. But at this property, this was located there, was once the first school that was opened up for Black people by the Friendly Societies to receive an education. Previous schools have been open for Blacks to attend by the Methodists and other churches, but Blacks wanted an educational institution of their own, and hence the Lane School was formed by the Friendly Societies. It was led by a Mr. Richard Tucker, and again, Mr. Richard Tucker, we heard of him earlier because he was also led the charge for ensuring that the enslaved people did not leave on the ship, the Enterprise ship at Bards Bay Park. So this is the same Richard Tucker again. And on January 1st, 1837, the Lane School was opened. It was a one-room schoolhouse built by Black Masons, and the first school teacher was named Mr. Augustus Henry Swan, and such subjects were taught were religious instruction, English grammar, maths, geography, and geometry. The second teacher at the Lane School was a Joseph Henry Thomas. He was also known to be one of the founders of the Berkeley Institute. The Lane School remained operational up until the 1920s when the building was privately sold to a family. The property in 2015 was owned by the Moonray Manor Trust and listed as a Grade 3 building of special architectural or historical interest. because of its importance in the history of Black education and social infrastructure development post-emancipation.
Okay, now we're looking at, I guess the next photo will be Alexandrina Hall, excuse me, which was built by the Grand United Order of the Oddfellows. They started it in 1840, where these gentlemen built the Summer's Pride of India in St. George's. So they started working on Alexandrina Hall in 1852, but the cornerstone was put down in May of 1862. This was conveyed by from the Corporation of Hamilton, and there were 3 people that were working for this: Joseph Henry Thomas, the schoolmaster of Lane School, John Henry Jackson, and William Smith. They were carpenters, and there was also a gentleman named Joseph Rainey, who was also a member of Alexandrina Hall. Joseph Rainey was not really a Bermudian. He was actually born into slavery in South Carolina. He was freed in the 1840s when his father purchased his freedom for the entire family. And in 1862, when the Civil War broke out, Joseph Rainey was among a group of Black people that were conscripted by the Confederates. And they were supposed to be working on these fortifications, help fight for the Confederates. He was a cook and he was a blockade ship runner on these ships that traded in Bermuda. And somewhere along the line, he decided, I'm out of here, and he came to Bermuda. He settled in Bermuda. He and his wife had 2 businesses. He was the barber, she was a well-known dressmaker. And then what happened is, 1865, there was an outbreak of yellow fever in St. George's. So they moved to the city of Hamilton, and they worked in the Hamilton Hotel. If you ever drive across City Hall, the parking lot there, that's where the Hamilton Hotel used to be. And in this hotel, Joseph Rainey took his barbershop business there. He also became the bartender, the bartender for the hotel. And his wife also worked as a dressmaker. He became a member of the Grand United Order of Oddfellows, a member of Alexandrina Hall, rose up in the ranks. The war ended, he and his money made some money, and they actually left Bermuda with about 9,000 pounds. And what makes him significant to Bermuda's history is because it's closely entangled to the US history, because when he left Bermuda, he went back to South Carolina, he ran for political office, he won, and he became the first African-American to be sworn into the US House of Representatives. And he also became the 2nd African-American congressman to ever hold office. Bermuda ties, imagine that. His plaque was unveiled in Washington in 2005. And where he used to cut here in St. George's, it is called Barber's Alley, quite adequate. Now, looking back again at Alexandrina Hall, again, this is a building owned by the Friendly Society. However, in May of 2008, there were plans to sell this building so that a condo hotel could be built. Needless to say, people made a lot of noise. The construction was opposed. The plans were not successful. The building was saved. And to date, lodge members still meet at Alexandrina Hall. And there's also a dance school there. You know it as United Dance Productions, run by Suzette Harvey. This is Alexandrina Hall, a cultural landmark, and it is indeed a major part of Black Bermudian history, because again, the Friendly Societies were very much involved with assisting freed Black Bermudians after emancipation in 1834.
Thank you for that, Gina. I appreciate it. So now we're going to play the second portion of Mr. Simmons' video.
If I may jump in real quick.
Yeah, sure, Charlie. Yeah, sorry.
And just share that in November of 1928, Marcus Mosiah Garvey attempted to visit Bermuda, but was stopped. And as a result, he spoke to the assembled Black Bermudian population from the deck of his ship. The authorities rightly felt apprehensive about allowing him to actually come on land and interact with Black Bermudians for fear that his inspiring oratory may inflame the masses. Well, anyway, his wife, Amy Jakes Garvey, no shrinking violet, and very much his intellectual equal, spoke at Alexandrina Hall to a standing room only audience, and her address, I'm told, was met with rounds of applause. So again, we have that link between the friendly societies and the UNIA, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, the organization that was developed by Marcus Mosiah Garvey, whose local headquarters, in fact, was right next to where Scratchy's Barbershop was located. That church, that was the Bermuda headquarters of the UNIA. So the friendly societies and the UNIA were united in their vision and dedication to Black racial uplift.
Excellent. Thank you, Jala, for that. And like you said, the church, that's quite interesting. Just before we move on to the video, just in early history, it says that the churches were actually used as places that they used for, Black people had used for political movement and just movement even economically, because that was only the safe place they could go and feel safe. And so they went church and had those conversations in church. So that's quite interesting that you said that the Marcus Garvey movement was located actually in that church right there. So we're gonna continue on, and we're just gonna play the second part of the Norbert's video of the Friendly Societies. I wanted to also talk about, you know, many people, especially in my generation and others too, lots of times is mixed up with the Freemasons and the Friendly Societies.
Yeah, the Freemasons.
Could you give some clarification on that?
Freemasons is a professional society.
Yeah.
And the professional society came out of the UK. Ours came out of the UK too, the Friendly Society, but the Friendly Society. Theirs is a professional society, and it came out of people who were professionals, largely engineers and that type of thing, who grouped together and set up an order and set up a structure for themselves. It's a man-only society, only for males, and they do have an ancillary for females, whereas the friendly societies are both male and female. My lodge in Somerset, the Law Irresistible Lodge of Manchester Unity, is an integrated society and been so for many years for male and female. The one in Hamilton, there's a female lodge and a man's lodge in the same building, and we meet differently, but we collaborate. We get together occasionally for meetings, all part of the district. There's a Somerset district of Manchester Unity, and there's a Hamilton district of Manchester Unity. And the Hamilton district is a district.
Do you ever think of joining them? Because with how now times have changed, whereas many
joining who?
Joining the men and women together.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like just making it one.
Happening.
Yeah, just one.
That's what's happening in the headquarters. And in the headquarters, they're recommending that because numbers all over the world are dwindling. And right. we need numbers, so that's been happening worldwide now. They're joining up. There are even some lodges that are very low in numbers, so lodges are joining up. Mm-hmm. Instead of having two Manchester Unities and Somerset and one Southampton, they're forming one now because numbers are down.
Right. Oh, I mean forming the men and the women. Even
yeah, men and women. They're doing men and women also, yeah. And also joining lodges for. Which are men and women, but joining them, amalgamating them because numbers are down.
Yeah. And one, just also one more thing to share with you. When I have brought the young people from Cedar Bridge there, they also requested if you could, you know, of course, when you get a chance to come into the school, because they would like to have a friendly society at the school, but they don't know how to create it.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, so don't forget that part too, because they really enjoyed coming to visit you.
Good. Well, you know, I mean, there were juveniles. As I said, I was a juvenile back 60 odd years or 65 years ago.
And you could bring that back.
Yeah, bring it back in law. We'd love to. I mean, but they've had juvenile lodges and other lodges in Hamilton since that time. A lady by Joy Wilson Tucker, who's with the Loyal Mayflower Lodge, and she's the historian for the Manchester Unity Lodge for both male and female. She was very much a part of the juvenile lodge. She ran a juvenile lodge for many, many years.
Oh, okay.
And
what would be her contact information? I mean, maybe her email in case.
Yeah, I'll
maybe,
get
or
that
you
to
could get her to, yeah.
I'll get that to you. In fact, I'm going to recommend you talk to her too, because she's very useful.
Oh, okay.
Some information, yeah. Yeah, Joy Wilson Tucker.
Okay. So basically what on, again, this is emancipation, and so that's what this discussion is about. So I wanted to also talk about how did the Friendly Societies contribute to the emancipation holiday that we, part of the holiday of what we call Cop Match.
Cop Match, yeah.
Yes.
Well, back in 1834 with Emancipation, there was much celebration, and the celebrations were in terms of fetes or parties or dances, picnics, cricket games, and there was a game between the Somers Lodge in St. George and the Victoria and Albert Lodge in Somerset. These are Grand United Lodges. These are lodges that came from the United States of America. There was a game, rival game had between those two lodges. And they were played, I think, first on the Royal Naval Field, which is the Warren Simmons Field in Somerset.
Yes.
That was the headquarters of the first Somerset Cricket Club. That building there was where the first Somerset Cricket Club began. And with the Somers Isle, the Somers Lodge based in St. George's, it was played at the Garrison Field over by RAA.
Yes.
There. So those were the two places where Cop Match was played. And it was decided that it be an annual event, and eventually it was taken over by the clubs, the St. George's Cricket Club and the Somerset Cricket Club. What years that occurred, I'm not very sure, but it was in 1902 that the first official Cup match was held. I'm not even sure where that was played.
Yeah.
I think it may have been
and
played.
I think it was in June. Why?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out, how did we get to, I guess August.
I didn't know if the first was played in June, but some were played in June.
Yeah, but it was like the first Cup match was actually played, it said June 1902, but now we have Cup match played, of course, over Emancipation holiday.
Yeah.
So I guess it's just trying to make it align it with the Emancipation.
I don't have that answer. I don't know. Yeah. But yeah, that's what happened, and it continued. It continued. I mean, Cup match is now 118 years old. We've had it every year, except for this year. I think one time it wasn't canceled, but it was held on a couple of times, held on alternate dates because of weather conditions or something else.
And I know another big thing, something else you guys also help out with lots of, for many years for people, was education. And I believe that
providing scholarships too.
Yeah, exactly, and especially for like the nurses. And that
many of the older nurses receive scholarships from the lodges.
Right.
And the nurses, there's still that can't say it still happens, but they meet occasionally, and some students might get a small stipend. But yeah, for many years, the lodges helped to educate nurses in particular. Lots of teachers were too, and that's where we get in terms of professions for our Black women. If you weren't a maid or a cook or seamstress.
Or school teacher.
Teaching professional careers became teaching and nursing.
Yeah.
Those were the areas where our Black women excelled, and those were the areas where the friendly societies assisted with education in terms of providing scholarships.
important things in history. This is legacy in history, especially Black Bermudian history. And it's said that I've even heard one time, a long time ago, that, oh, you don't want to be a part of these organizations because they do devil worship and stuff. And I'm like, what are people talking about? And then you go have the conversations with persons just as yourself, and then you enlighten us and inform us on what it's really about. And that's why we really have to research our own history. Because I think lots of times, lots of propaganda is put out there purposely for many of us who are Black Bermudians even, who, for us not to join certain organizations, just somebody ill talking it because they have their own agenda in some way of just trying to always keep us separate. And we just have to be so careful about that. And I find if you really want to know about something, go ask yourself, go ask questions, do your own research. Never take information from people who have nothing to do with an organization. Find out for yourself.
The lodges have had a bad rap. Because it's a secret society. What happens in our society was secret because things that happen within behind closed doors in lodge room we don't share. That's what it is. There's certain orders and certain procedures that we have. Anyone can be part of lodge. If you believe in the Bible, you read the Bible, you can be a lodge member. You know, and that's not a requirement, but if you do that, that can happen. It's part of the worship that we do. The Bible is open during all our meetings. We refer to the Bible and we quote the Bible. But there's certain things that we do in terms of business and order that we keep secret as such because that's part of what we do. You know?
And it's understood. But unfortunately, like I said, many, even from my generation and some, because we're not informed, we're uninformed, we make these assumptions and we believe them to be true, which is so the worst thing you could do. And like you said, it's understandably, after you read the history, and I've read a lot of history, I completely understand why it would remain a secret organization. Because like you said, because sometimes from the outside, things that were going on in those years, in the 1800s, the early 1900s, and so on, it was just a constant fight, constant struggle, you know, to do things. And you want to do things to be, like I said, unmolested, because instead of someone coming in and, you know, just doing things that, you know, there's just not the purpose for it. But unfortunately, a lot of people don't know the history, and they don't understand what's happened to many Black Bermudians previously, and a lot of pain that's still hurt and even still in our society. And our society still, I believe, still requires a lot more healing. A lot of conversations we haven't had that we need to have. And so I understand it, but a lot of people wouldn't understand why it would remain a secret society. But
we do, because the things that we do, there's a certain ritual that we go by. And to learn and understand what the ritual is, you have to be part of the society. We do things a certain way and at certain times, and different persons in the organization have certain rules to play and to administer the ritual that we conduct ourselves by. As I said, anyone is interested in coming on board if they believe in the Bible. Then yes, you need to swear on the Bible at times. You're eligible for become membership.
Okay, great. So we thank Mr. Simmons for his time from the Manchester Lodge. So as we continue on here, based on discussion with Mr. Simmons, you guys will see a picture there of the Manchester Lodge. And the Manchester Lodge, most of you guys should be familiar where exactly it is. It's directly across from like People's Pharmacy right there. I believe that's on the corner of Union Street and Victoria Street. And I could be wrong, but I believe that's where it is. And they still have businesses in that building, you know. And in 1905, members of the Loyal Flower of the Day Lodge purchased 2 lots right there on Victoria Street. And they first built a magnificent colonial opera house, which Norbert had talked about earlier in his presentation, but it was later demolished by fire. And in 1923, they built the Manchester Unity Hall. So next time, if you guys see that building, if you look right to the top there, you will see it will say MU Hall, and that stands for Manchester Unity Hall. During the years of segregation in Bermuda, the Opera House became the premier performing arts center for the Black community, and because of the lodge's non-racial policies, the white community also participated as performers and patrons from Bermuda and overseas. It was known to be the best theater in Bermuda. Manchester Unity Hall, like I said, now houses commercial businesses, and it is the home of the two lodges there, which is the, as Mr. Simmons had mentioned earlier, there's the Men's Lodge, which is called the Loyal Flower of the Day Lodge of the Independent Order of Odd Fellows, and the Women's Lodge called the Loyal Mayflower Lodge of the Independent Order of Fellows. Bermuda itself, a British colony, was not void of the activities of Black-friendly societies and lodges, as they were called, underscored by the fact that in 1868, the Bermuda government introduced legislation to actually govern their activities. But even though Blacks still gained a great political awareness, and many Black businesses still began to spring up everywhere as Black men and women began to speak out and establish their own businesses. As Ajala had mentioned earlier, we actually had a Garveyism movement here in Bermuda. So this lodge right here is the Samaritan's Lodge, which is located on Cobbs Hill, there over in Cobbs Hill. And this is another lodge we have. Well, this is actually the Bermuda Heritage Museum. It's a Black Bermudian History Museum. And this was called a Samaritan's Lodge previously, but now it's a Black Bermudian History Museum. So as we continue on, now we're gonna play a short video based on Emancipation Cup match. But as you guys see, a poll's gonna come up, or so you could vote on the poll, whether you guys teams, Somerset or St. George's.
St. George's, green and blue. Somerset, red and blue. Welcome to the Cup.
Big money on the table, big bet, big payout. You gotta put it on the table.
Okay, thank you for that. So how many in the poll? Okay, so we got a good bit of, you guys can look up on the screen here. Looks like Somerset still leading the way. So I guess the Cups, well, I know the Cups can stay in Somerset anyway, so I don't know. You like a
Go Somerset!
So if you guys do want to feel free to comment a little banter, that's nice, because this year is quite somber in that we're going to really miss not having the annual Cup Match Classic that we usually do. And I attend Cup Match every year, so I'm really going to miss it. But that doesn't mean that we still cannot celebrate Emancipation, because we have to remember that the holiday is actually Emancipation, which evolved into Cup Match. So as we continue on here, Gina, you want to just share some information?
Yeah, I was getting ready to say
Someone has
that.
a question as well about the Heritage Museum in St. George's. Is it reopened?
We would have to check. It's best to call them because they're not open all the time. So they only open, I know when I visit there sometimes for information, I have to call them to request to see if someone will be there.
All right, so as I was saying about Cup Match and Emancipation, basically cup match is, not only is it the best holiday in Bermuda, it is historic because it represents the world's longest strike. Because basically what happened, right? In 1st August 1834, exactly 1 year after Emancipation Day, August 1st, 1834, every single currently employed worker that was previously an enslaved person decided that they weren't going to work that day. And they took off and they celebrated their Emancipation Day. And this occurred every 1st August for decades. The 1 day stoppage of work expanded into 2 days. And by 1870s, it was regularly started to include a cup match with various teams, as we heard earlier from the Friendly Societies. Then in 1902, the St. George's and the Somerset Cricket Clubs, they bought a silver trophy, and they agreed that they would contest for this cup every Emancipation Day, and Somerset has it this year. And they agreed that the cricket game would take place over 2 days. And so they took these 2 days off and they played cricket on these 2 days, and it still wasn't a public holiday. And this was in 1902. This voluntary withdrawal of labor continued for another 44 years until 1946, when the Bermuda government passed legislation and declared a 2-day holiday over the Emancipation Day, called a cup match, and so that other people wouldn't get upset, they slapped on Summer's Day after that, which is now Mary Prince Day. So this strike had gone on for 111 years. 111 years, people stopped work for 2 days before it was designated an official government holiday. And now every Bermudian and all residents celebrate cup match. And when you go look back at where we started, the significance of Mary Prince, her contribution, her written work, her voice contributed to Emancipation Day. So it just stands to reason that one of those days would be celebrated as Emancipation Day and Mary Prince Day. Cup match, and Somerset is going to retain the cup this year. I'm just saying.
All right. Okay. But thank you for that, Gina. That was fantastic. Jala, you guys, do you want to share anything about what was just read just now?
Yeah, I'm not colorist, you see. Although I bleed blue and blue, but we're not gonna talk about that. As we know.
Are you trying to say that you're for St. George's, like the wrong team?
Why can't we?
That's what it sounds like you're saying to me, Ajala. And I liked you up until this point. I'm
Well,
just letting you know.
Let's just state what is known, that both Mary Prince and Sally Bassett were staunch St. George's supporters. That's all I have to say about that. Now, here's a note. That at no point in human recorded history has a holiday been granted to celebrate a Black woman. No country has done that. So Bermuda has effectively set a global precedent with elevating Mary Prince to her rightful status as a national hero with a holiday to her name, a holiday that, as my co-pilot said, she helped to bring about, along, of course, with many millions of known and unknown Africans across the continent and the diaspora. So again, we should be rightfully proud of our ancestor of the soil, born in Brackish Pond, Devonshire, and the valuable contribution she made to the liberation movement that occasioned emancipation on August 1st, 1834.
Great, fantastic. Yeah, I'll just thank you for that, Charlotte. That was great. So now, guys, we're coming up, it's pretty much to the closing of our presentation now, but we are gonna finish off. If you want to stay on, you don't have to. We're gonna play another recording of another Manchester Lodge member, Miss Joy Wilson Tucker. So if you want to remain on after we're finished, you can listen to her story as well too, as being a part of the lodges. As you guys see up here on the screen, it's a Pearls came up, and we just want to ask of your interest of what other talks you might be interested in, so we could put them together for you and continue to share this history with you guys. So after that, we'd just like to say that also in August, the week of August 4th, we're actually going to be doing, myself and Ajala are going to be actually doing a virtual book study of Mary Prince and her enslaved narrative, because we really want to go into her enslaved narrative, especially with her being a Bermudian. We want to share with everybody her story and how, you know, what we could get out of that story and how we can move forward and even heal from that, because we know, especially in our community, in the Black community, we still have a lot of trauma. And I don't have to speak of that right now, but we know that there's still a lot of trauma in our community, and it stems from, a lot of it stems from slavery, a lot of these behaviors, and we're gonna just share some of that with you. So if you guys want to go to the website titantoursbermuda.com, and you can sign up for that book study. It's a 5-week book study, and we're just looking to, you know, really get into her enslaved narrative, and so that we could, you know, as we go back to Sankofa, we're going to journey back into the past. We can't change the past, but we can learn from it and just figure out a way how we could continue to make things better. So, G, you want to go ahead and clear us out for us?
Well, I've
Sure.
got one little bit to say as well. If anybody wants some more information on sankofabermuda.com, if you go to sankofabermuda.com, that website is something that we started. We started putting up a lot of Bermudian history on there. So if you want a good resource, you can go check that website out. Lots and lots of information there as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And you're absolutely right. I'm looking forward to that. So, good evening, folks. And I truly thank you very much for coming and enjoying our presentation. I hope that you didn't just enjoy it, but you certainly learned from it. And we're truly thankful that you decided to spend your night with us. And as we depart, there are two things. Let your friends know what we are doing. Let people know what we are doing so that we can ensure that we educate everybody. Every time something comes up from Titan or Sankofa, let folks know that it is a learning experience to be enjoyed. But as I sign out, let me sign out with some of these last words. In everlasting memory of the anguish of our ancestors, may those who died rest in peace. May those who return find their roots, and may humanity never again perpetuate such injustice against humanity. And we, the living, vow to uphold this never again, never again, never again. Again, we hope you enjoyed this presentation. We hope you've learned from this. Feel free to visit our website at sankofabermuda.com. Like our Sankofa Journey Bermuda Facebook and Instagram pages. Look up Titan Tours for our next up-and-coming events. And just let people know this is an educational experience, not to be missed.
Yeah, so thank you guys. Have a good evening. We're very grateful for you. And like we said, this is the end of the presentation, but if you want to continue on, we're going to play the video from Ms. Joy Wilson Tucker, and you guys can listen.
From my research, the Friendly Societies came about in early 1810. And I think it was because it was a means of finding ways to help one's fellow man, people that were sort of struggling down and out, because we've always seen since world began that you've always had sort of a upper class and a lower class, you know, of people that needed that assistance. So I think this was the idea that brought about the Friendly Societies. And in the beginning, the original group consisted of just men. There were no women involved in it. It was just men. And they were combined. You had what was just a friendly society. There was no separation of Freemasons and, as they were called, them independent orders.
Yes.
They were combined together, but from what I've been made to understand and folklore and just some of what I've looked at is that somewhere along the line, like all organizations, there was a dispute. And in the dispute, the Freemasons separated themselves from the other group, and so they became Freemasons and independent orders.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then after that, it was a matter that the Freemasons had to be sort of, they were more like tradespeople. And
Yeah.
they said Freemasons, they had trades like masonry and carpentry and different things like that. In the friendly societies, it wasn't stipulated that you had to have a trade. You could just there were some stipulations of you joining,
Yes.
but you didn't necessarily have a trade. And in the Freemasons, they're called free and accepted Masons because of the trade and all that they have. But through different things, you had to, with the Freemasons, sort of be, I would say, financially able to support yourself.
Okay.
And that was basically one of the criteria that they looked at, because they looked on the Freemasons to be able to support and help their fellow man. And they more or less, with their support, kept it secret. They didn't go out and blab all over the place that we've given donations to this person or the other person. They do those type of things, but they more or less kept it, secret. In the friendly societies, we had no qualms about being able to support, but we wasn't that financially stable.
Mm-hmm.
Where because you had like people who didn't have much money. They just had just their regular jobs like plumbers and carpenters and masons and the carriage drivers and things like that. And those people at that time had large families.
Yes.
So this is where the basic support came in. And one of the criteria was that when you came into the order, you had to be of upstanding character. In other words, you really weren't supposed to be coming into the order and, falling down drunk.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
You sort of, like I said, be of sort of upstanding character, not coming in there and using a whole lot of profanity and things like that. So on the other hand, we sort of helped, when you came in with that criteria, we sort of helped to build character in the independent orders. And it wasn't a compulsory in our order for you to be member of any church. Some people think that it's a cult, and they're secretive this way and secretive the other way, and it's a cult. It's not a cult. When they came together, like I said, it was to be able to help their fellow man, to be able to get along.
Yes.
In the world and basically here in Bermuda, because things were, as you know, with slavery, things would have been really, really tight.
Yes.
And so that's one of the reasons. Now the difference between there's that difference between Freemasons and the independent order, but there is also a difference between our independent order and the Alexandrina as to where we originated. Our independent order originated in England.
Mm-hmm.
The Alexandrinus order originated in the U.S. along with the Samaritans.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be the only difference in our order there, but our basic principles, which is the Samaritans Lodge, the Alexandrina Lodge, and our order, the independent order, all of our principles are basically the same. Would have been to help the sick and distress. If a person like couldn't afford to send a child to school, the Lord would support them. If they couldn't, if a woman lost her husband, the Lord would step in and help until she's able to get on her feet. The person passed away, the Lord was responsible for the funeral. And they would go, if the person was sick, they were responsible. They would pick individuals and they would alternate and go and sit with the family member in that house that was sick in order to give the people's children or husband or wife a break. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So all those things was done in the homes, but they were definitely responsible for different things like that. And we were never what you call, even now they keep saying, we were a charity. We did charitable acts, but we've never been a charity to the point where we've gone out and acquired a charitable number from government in order that we can become a charity. We've never done that. And we didn't have insurance,
Right.
so to speak. Like I said, they did things, as I had just finished earlier explaining to you. They did things upon request. If somebody died, the wife would write in, and then they would put off so much money to help the wife. And if she had children, they would help the children and things. If you got sick aid, your sick aid only lasted for a certain amount of time. As long as you were confined to bed or in the house. If you came out, then you no longer would be getting that sick aid. They would consider that you were well enough to move about. So you wouldn't get that sick aid. So that would be basically, and when I said that they considered us a cult, I said we open our meetings with prayer, and that Bible stays open through the whole meeting. We have a prayer and a scripture. And when we close our meeting, we close it with prayer.
Yes.
So it's basically founded on those type of principles. But we don't discriminate against a person if they don't believe in the Bible and things like that. It would be their choice if they want to come in. You know, we don't change our principles to suit them. They would have to come in, and if it's not to their liking, then we don't hold them back if they want to leave. But basically, those are the principles that we govern ourselves by.
Oh, okay, great, excellent. Yeah, it's really excellent because you talked about someone from the Friendly Society is even given to help someone at a home, and I said that even goes into like I guess the nurses because you guys help to start like a lot of the nursing programs.
Yeah, we had that was later when they organized, and we still have it actually.
Okay.
It's a nursing association. We still have that, and that was a combination because at one given time we had 53 lodges here in Bermuda.
Wow.
And the nursing association was made up of like 2 or 3 representatives from those different orders, because we had lodges in Somerset, St. George's, down in Blue Hill, St. David's in that area, Southampton, Warwick, just about every parish we had lodges. And like I said, most of all was governed on the same principle. So they came together and organized the Nursing Association. And they were responsible for coming together and starting the, up there at the Cottage Hospital. They used to send nurses to the Cottage Hospital in Happy Valley and Pembroke when they had the first hospital there. And a lot of the midwives and people like that, that's where they got some of their training.
Right.
Up there at the Cottage Hospital.
Okay.
And so now we have the Nursing Association now. We will basically support if a young person wants to go away to study nursing or to study senior care and things like that. They would give you so you can apply to the Nursing Association, and they will give you, say, something like $5,000 or something like that in scholarship, depending on what they can afford, because it's a small association now.
Right.
Because we only have about, I think maybe about 6 lodges left. And basically, so they have, they do still help in that way. And I think about maybe a year, 2 years ago, they branched away from just helping people who wanted to study in the nursing field and help someone who was in the dental field who wanted to go into dentistry. Because things were changing, and we needed to sort of try to change along with the times.
Right.
And instead of denying this young person, they, came together, had the meeting, and said, we think we would go ahead and try to help this young person to, further their studies in the dental field. Now, I don't know whether they will continue to do that or if this was a one-off thing. But like we've said, in order to keep up with the world the way it's going, we have to try and get out of some of our, sort of stuffy ways and move along with the times.
Yeah, exactly. So it was also stated that the Friendly Societies, they also assisted Black people in the community for stuff like gift hands and pensions and insurance and, like you said, college savings. I guess you could share anything about that?
Okay, that's still a bit of a little bit of a myth.
Okay.
Because when they're talking about what do they call it, hand clubs?
Yeah, hand clubs,
like
yeah.
Now,
Yes.
I'm not denying that around the island they had hand clubs, but when what we operated was a gift club.
Yes.
And it was started out by my grandfather way back in 1907.
Wow.
And he started the gift club, and it encouraged anybody. You didn't have to be a member of the lodge, and it encouraged people to just come in and put the money in. They had it like once a week, and you would put in whatever you could afford to put in. And at Christmas time, it's when you got you got paid out, and you can go ahead and buy your little Christmas goodies and your Christmas food, and sort of gave you a sort of a more enjoyable and relaxing Christmas holiday.
Yeah.
It wasn't a case where you're going to save this money for your child to go to college, at least not in those early stages, because some people that will come in also were able to put in at that time, because we had pound shillings and pence. So all they were able to put in sometimes was maybe 2 shillings or 3 shillings, and we had some little children that will come in and just put in a sixpence.
Right.
So, but as the club progressed, several of them, because it was like I would have to say sort of each lodge sort of operated, or even a church operated a savings club. And what I'd like to stipulate here, that if you think about the lodges, they were more cultural center type of thing, because every lodge had a church connected to it. And every lodge had like a movie theater connected to it, where you can have your cultural plays and your dances and different things like that there.
Yeah.
So it was sort of a place that and the lodge people, many of the lodge people operated it. And this was the same case with the Savings Club, because we have one in Somerset and one in Southampton up at Vernon Temple. We have one in Warwick up at Cedar Hill, one on, I think it was not Cups Hill, up by Lost Memorial Hall. They had a club, savings club there. We have one down here at Grace Church on the North Shore Road. And we also have one up at Smith Hill Church. And then we have one at St. Monica's Church.
Oh, okay, great, fantastic.
I don't know about too many. What I know of those down in St. George's, they were like hand clubs where you would have to put your money in, and it just stayed. That was almost like a pension, but from our savings clubs and things like that, we didn't have a pension.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we didn't have any type of pensions and things like that. Those decisions would have been on the earners of the individuals as to what they wanted to do with their money. And that's the thing that really hindered us, because when government came out with insurance,
Yes.
it sort of hindered us
Yes.
in what we were doing. So, that was, because we couldn't afford to do those types of things, so that sort of hindered us.
Yeah, because it seemed like the friendly societies, you guys came up with the idea of doing it, and pretty much that was like insurance with helping people out and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it seemed like they, to me, that's my opinion, it seemed like they took that idea and legislated it and put it into law. And of course, then you see, insurance companies coming out, and then you say, okay, well, who owns those insurance companies? And it was a lot of the wealthy white people at the time. They owned them. So you see the transfer, like, of things like that, and it looks like, you really have to do your research on it. So I always found that very interesting, especially when I found out that it was started, the insurance segment, and definitely helping out people started out with the friendly societies. And then it looks like government pretty much copied the template and made things into law.
They did.
Yeah.
They did, and it hindered us a lot. And then when the integration came about, I think that was in sometime way down in the 70s, the early 70s. When that came about, you found lots of our people that moved away from our organizations and went and joined the white organizations.
Okay.
But the white people didn't cross over to us.
Yeah, I also found that very interesting with the friendly society, especially when you talk about having the theater at the Manchester Lodge in Hamilton, the opera house, and that was way before my time. But just reading information about the opera house and how fascinating and it was the best theater in Bermuda, and it was grand and had the best stage. Like they said, people thought that they were in New York when they were in it. So I couldn't imagine what it must have looked like. And to know that white people were still able to, you guys allowed them to come around there, still have their shares, still admit them, still allow them to come in and then and use the opera house as well as attend there, but then blacks were not able to get into Hamilton.
Right.
That's really interesting.
But an amazing piece of information. My grandfather was one of the builders of the opera house.
Oh, okay, great.
And he was the first manager of the opera house. So it was, I really didn't understand. Well, I can't say that we don't understand, because I think that everybody thought that when they really started to associate, and the white folks, like you said, whenever they saw us prospering with something, they came along and took the idea and infused it for their own selves, and that's what happened.
Yes.
That's what happened. Yeah, but that was the first black theater that was built there. And I mean, they used to have master shows. I went there as a little child and things like that there. And they had master shows, stage shows, all sorts of things there. And underneath the opera house, people might not realize, was mineral water factory, which my grandfather rented from the lodge, and he opened the first colonial mineral water factory right there in that lodge. And it operated until he passed away in 1932. And for the next 2 years, my father and his brothers operated it. And then they sold it to John G. Bassett.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then Mr. Bassett took it over. He then moved it over here to Marsh Valley and called it John G. Bassett and Sons.
Oh, okay.
You see?
Yes.
But it was called the Colonial Mineral Water Factory first, because it was right there underneath the Colonial Opera House.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Great. So also, because also we're going to talk about in the talk is a lot more the earlier history too with Richard Tucker. He was involved with the Enterprise ship story.
Yeah.
And then we also going to talk a little bit about Joseph Rainey. He was an African American who was here, and he became the first congressman. The first.
Yeah.
Overseas. And then we're going to talk about Joseph Thomas, and he was a headmaster, the second headmaster at Lane School, and also one of the founders of the Berkeley Institute. So we'll be sharing that in the talk too. But do you want to share anything, any stories that you know about them?
Okay, I know there is an extensive research on the Enterprise. Extensive research there. We discovered that with the 78 slaves and how they were hidden into almost the galley part of the ship, and that the captain of that ship said the only thing that he had done and there was tobacco.
Yeah.
And stuff like that there. And that's when it was discovered that the slaves were there. And Richard Tucker at that time, he was a member of an institution, and at that time it was not referred to as a friendly society. It was referred to as friendly institution.
Mm-hmm.
And he, being the president, went and negotiated with reported it to the worshipful judge at that time, and told them that this captain had these people on board, and still the captain denied it, but they kept the ship here. And so he was responsible, along with some of his other colleagues, of helping to get these slaves free. All but 5 of them. It was a woman, Minna, not Minna.
She's named Anna Ridge. I don't know if they said Ridgely or.
She was Wrigley.
Yeah, Wrigley, something like that.
I'm thinking of my other slave story. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And Anna Wrigley, and she had 5 children, and the youngest of those children was 3. And everybody wanted to know why would she choose to go back. And I'm saying I think she chose to go back, and I don't know if anybody else has ever thought of that.
Yeah.
But in the groups that I met with, I said I think she chose to go back because she left a husband there somewhere, and she wanted to go back to her husband with her children. So she went back, but all the others stayed here. But he basically, from the friendly institution, was responsible for helping to get them free from the Enterprise. And I think it's the same. Richard Tucker was also responsible for, it was Julian Tucker, so let me not get this mixed up. Yeah, because that's what he was responsible for. So I have to be careful talking to you, see, because I operate the museum in St. George's.
Okay.
So under the Black Museum of Indian Heritage. So I have to be careful with my talkers.
Yes,
Okay, so then you wanted to know about Joseph Rainey.
Yeah.
And the only thing I can expound on that is that, when he came here, because I did the whole story of him, but it's not going to all come to me, that's for sure. But when he came here, he was escaping from his own place of birth in Old Brooklyn with his wife here, and he became a member of the Alexandrina Lodge. That's the one that sits behind the banking town right across from the Parliament House.
Yes.
Where the UDP dancers practice.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That's the Alexandrina Lodge. He became a member of that lodge, and he stayed a member of that lodge until he was ready to leave Bermuda. But while a member of that lodge, he was responsible for signing a letter, a petition that went off to the U.S. to assist the president, and I can't remember right offhand who the president was at that time, but to assist a president that was a serving president in the United States with some issues that they were having there at that time. And he and a couple of the other members of the Alexandrina sent a petition off at that time. Now, we had that
Okay, great.
Signature and everything that he was responsible for. Yeah, so I know he was responsible.
Yes, I researched. It said I think he sent it off to President Lincoln.
Yeah.
It was in regards to to emancipating the enslaved people in America.
Emancipating the slaves. Yeah, yeah, that's what he was responsible for. And then this Joseph Thomas, he was another one that was a member of the Alexandrina Lodge.
Okay.
And yeah, he was the second headmaster of the Lane School and the founder of the Berkeley Institute. And to my knowledge, he lived in a house that was called Teacher's Place.
That's interesting.
And that's right there where Axel Tilbury Association is right now.
Yes.
Road. That was his original home, called Teacher's Place. That's where he lived. And he did quite a lot, as far as I can understand, for education. But they were definitely members of the Alexandrina Lodge.
Oh, okay, excellent. So the next one is basically with the friendly societies and the lodges, their contribution to cup match, and basically they say it. I guess they started playing cricket and it turned into cup match, and I guess you could share your story on your thoughts of that and how it even got handed over to the actual clubs like the Somerset Cricket Club and the St. George's Club.
Okay, well, from what I've been made to understand, and with my little bit of research and all from my parents, because I had a vast amount of family members that were members of the order, both male and female. But what it really started out as was large picnics. Every year, these societies would go and they would picnic. And the women, of course, would be responsible for the food, and the men would go along and they would play these little cricket games. And it ended up where eventually they started to have a little competition between the societies. And that was that would have been the Alexandrina Lodge in Somerset. They had a lodge in Somerset right there by the church.
Oh, okay, yes.
St. James Church is another church, a church hall somewhere in that area. It's an Odd Fellows Hall. They were Lodge 1027. They were called Victoria, I think Victoria and Albert. It was Lodge 1027. Well, they were responsible up in Somerset area. And then we had the lodge in St. George's area, which was the Summers Pride of India. And they eventually would come together in a competition. But even prior to that, when the lodges just wanted to have some friendly matches, what we refer to as our noble Graham, he would appoint somebody in the Friendly Society Independent Order and say, we're going to have something such and such a day, and I would like for you to contact Alexandrina Lodge and get some of their junior members to come out and have a competition with us. So it was also always a cricket something in between, between the lodges. But once it became so large, and the slaves, many of them, once they had the sort of, I guess, didn't even have the freedom at that time, really, but they would sneak off to watch the games and things like that there. It was no way really to control them. And the picnics and the games became so large that it was decided that they would play for a cup.
Okay.
And when they decided they would play for this cup, that's when it was decided, well, why don't we, let the clubs take over?
Oh, okay.
And you ended up with the Somerset and the St. George's. She let the club take over, and I think the first game that was played was like in 1902 or something like that. They played the first game, and they played for a cup.
Right.
Because once that came about, they couldn't control the slaves. So that's when they decided that, because the slaves would sneak off it regardless of punishment or what, they wanted to see the game, and that's when it was decided that they would give it a holiday, and you ended up with your 2-day holiday.
Yeah, yeah, because it actually took the holiday. It took over 100 years before it even became a holiday.
Yeah.
And that was
Yeah.
interesting too, that a
Yeah.
lot of people, before I'm speaking to know but I also spoke to Mr. John Stavo, an older gentleman who actually used to play, and yeah, he said a lot of people lost their jobs. It was very sentimental talking to Mr. Stavo about it,
Yeah.
and he's just said to make sure that I do, just get this story out there so people would know, especially young people, that a lot of sacrifices were made for this cup match, even for them to play cup match and to have the Emancipation holiday.
Exactly.
It's just really interesting.
And,
Yeah.
and you had a time, there was a time, even with that there, that they would not, Somerset would not pick anybody to play on their team that lived across the bridge. And St. George's was the same way.
Right.
Like now, you would have Lee Rayner and all these different people playing for St. George's, and you'd have some people for St. George's playing for Somerset. But at one point, they never picked anybody like that. They didn't come across that bridge to do any pickings.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's been a long challenge, and I think that my basic concern is I'm glad that you're doing this, because I don't want us to lose that history either, because it just seems like we've got people, foreigners, that's coming in here and just chipping away at our history. And if we don't pay attention, we're not going to have anything to leave for our children or grandchildren.
Exactly. And like I said, it's like even this year, it may be even an historical year in that we may not have cup match. It's it's a high possibility. But we have to remember, like you said, giving back to what it's really meant about too. And I will admit it, I go to the game, I enjoy it with family and stuff, but the holiday is Emancipation. And like you said, at first they started out with a really big picnic and enjoying it. And, maybe even if we go back to that, even though we have to social distance, but you still remember that day in remembrance of those who came before us, that the holiday is Emancipation, and they chose to play the game of cricket, and which turned into cup match.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was a gentleman's game.
Right.
They didn't get out there and get all disagreeable and fuss and feud and carry on. They played a gentleman's game of cricket.
Exactly. Yes.
And that's why now, for the past, I would have to say for the past maybe 10 years, going on 11 years, the Bermuda Friendly Societies, we came together as a group, and we decided that we would give a trophy out to the person that displayed good sportsmanship during the game. And so we've been doing that for the past 11 years after cup match is finished. And we get some of the umpires and the adjudicator and all to select a person to come and receive that award from us after the cup match is over. Mostly we do it like maybe depending on when cup match falls, we do it in the latter part of July or the middle of August. Yeah.
Right. And that was interesting too, because I think last year the umpires, you guys, they decided not to give it to anybody.
Right.
That was interesting.
But that was very unusual. I think that, I don't know, I didn't really agree with that, because I think somebody should have been acknowledged.
Yes.
And the sisters and brothers had a discussion on that. And we just think that somebody should have been acknowledged for some reason. Somebody had to do something that was worth being acknowledged for, So
Yeah.
But that's how cup match came about, and the women used to go out. I mean, everybody goes out and all the finery now, all the backs out and all that sort of stuff. but in my mama's time, if the women hailed for Somerset, everything they had on would have been red and blue.
Right.
And if they held for St. George's, everything would have been blue and blue.
Right.
And I remember one time she said to me and my sisters and friends, we all went down, and everybody traveled on boats. It was there, and horse and carriage and things like that, and the horse and trolley. Said, and one year they went down on this boat, and the guys, like, teenagers, they would have their little boyfriends. And she said, and they threatened them that if St. George's, and all the girls that had on St. George's dresses, they was going to cut them off. And if it was something, they was going to do likewise. They were more Bisla was praying for the team to be here.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So another question we have is, I guess, how many organized lodges, friendly societies are still probably, I guess, in existence today? Yeah, and I guess in the event if people want to join, I guess if you don't mind, I could probably give them your contact information, and I guess you could share with us what's the process to join.
Yeah, we have, let's see, Samaritans, Irresistible, and the Friendly Society. Oh, Lord. We've got about 4 left that's really, really existing right now. And it's the Samaritan's Lodge and the Loyal Irresistible, they're combined, just the brothers and the sisters are combined together. Down in Alexandrina, theirs is separate. So you have Alexandrina, and they have their sister lodge, what meets in the same building. It's called House Hill of Roots. And then with us, our brothers and our sisters, we meet in the same lodge, but we're in the same lodge building, but we're under the Loyal Mayflower Lodge, and the other one is Loyal Flower of the Day. So Loyal Flower of the Day is all the brothers, and Loyal Mayflower is all the sisters.
Oh, okay, great. And which parishes are they in?
Okay, ours is in Pembroke. Ours is right across from People's Pharmacy.
Yes.
That's the Loyal Mayflower and Flower of the Day. Mm-hmm. Loyal Irresistible is in Somerset. Samaritans is up in Copseal and Warwick. And House Hill of Roots and Alexandrina is in the Hamilton City. I think that wouldn't be classed as Pembroke, because Pembroke doesn't go that far. But they are right there behind the bank on Church Street. That's where their lodge is.
Oh, okay, yes. Okay. And I guess the last, we're coming up on the last one, the last question is, I guess, what do you see the future of the organization going forward, or how would you like to see it?
Well, I really was hoping that I was really beginning to see some progress, because of what I didn't state here is that my reasons for joining the lodge initially was because, like I said, my grandfather was there, and I had several family members there. And then I was intrigued, and in joining the lodge, I learned a great deal, because I was a very sort of shy, quiet person. I still am to a certain extent, but it helped me to have more confidence, be able to speak out. And I marveled at the fact that my grandfather became not just an installing master, but a lecture master. And you could hear people, and read through some of the minutes and things like that, how good he was at his work, right? And so that encouraged me. So I'm now followed in those footsteps, where from my lodge, I've become the installing master and a lecture master, because I passed through all of my chairs in my lodge. I've been there 40 plus years. So I passed through all of those chairs in my lodge. It's a learning process. If a person really wants to learn how to do minutes or be a treasurer, or how to, when you're listening to the House of Parliament, how to object to something that's coming across the floor, when to stand up and speak and things. These are the types of things that you can learn there in the order. And plus, it's like an extended family, when you get there. in and things like that, you know. So for me, it was a good thing, and I'm sorry that we no longer have our junior lodge.
Yeah.
Because that finished quite some time ago, and that's the difficulty that all the lodges had at that time, is that as things progress, the younger people seemed like they weren't interested in stuff like that because there was so many other things that was coming along to take their interest. And now it's more so that I think like the youngest person we might be got in our order might be, let's say, in her late 30s, early 40s.
Right.
Our joining age is 18 for our lodge. I think it's been years since we've had somebody 18 years that will come in, you know. And then when to get them in there and to keep their interest, to help them to stay there, that's the other difficulty, because it's so much outside of there that attracts them.
Yes.
You see, so it makes it extremely difficult. The brothers, our brothers, the loyal law of the day, because we refer to them as our brothers, they're struggling with maybe about 14 members, and at one point they had over 70.
Wow. Yeah.
You know, and Alexandrina was the same way. They were getting ready to close and sell the building until we made a fuss about it, you know, and they had kept it open, but they're sort of struggling in order to keep it open. And then the household of Ruth, they picked up a little bit in getting some I say younger sisters, but they too are in the 30s and 40s and things like that there, you know. But it, like I said, it's a challenge in trying to, because everybody thinks that, oh, Lodge, you know, that's the first thing they say, but they don't know what they're missing in, you know, becoming a part of it. Because I told someone when Mr. Butler first joined the House of Assembly, and I said to one of these lot in my meeting, I said, you know what, if he would have been a member of the order, he would have known how to conduct himself up there in that House of Assembly, and he wouldn't have got called on in one of his first speeches or whatever that he made, because he would have known how to conduct himself. And that's what they teach us there, how to do your auditing, you know, how to do your minutes, how to amend the minutes. All of those things you learn there, so when you step outside that door, you should be ready to face anything. It's not just coming in there and being ritualistic, you know. So at least, and you have to want to be a part of it.
Yeah.
That's the other part. You really have to want to be a part of it. And we were starting to, because like in the past 3 years, 4 years, we've taken in about 12, 15 new members.
Right.
And this year we were getting ready to initiate another 3, but with this pandemic coming up, that sort of stifled everything. And now we're going to look at how we're going to work this thing. Is, you know, how it's going to be changed. We're going to have to change our whole format as to, you know, how we go about doing whatever it is that we have to do.
Exactly, yeah. Like even I would have liked to have had this with you in person, but we had to do it this way.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah.
because with initiations, you sort of have to be up close with the individual, you know, to bring them into the order. You just got to sort of have to be up close with them and things like that. And even with me giving a lecture, it's certain movements that I have to make in order to give lectures and issue degrees and things like that. And so, but now there's at least for the foreseeable future, those type of movements and all has got to change. And we're going to get together to see how we're going to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll get there. We'll work it out. It'll